Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now relax and unwind. I had visited my family for the holidays and was driving back home. The trip in total was about 10 hours, which I split into 2 drives on the way out. But on the way back, I decided to power through it in one long drive. Around the halfway point, snow started coming down. It wasn't too much, so I wasn't worried about it. However, it got worse as I kept driving. Once I was 3 hours away from home, it was pouring down pretty heavily, and with the sun going down as well, it definitely was not ideal. There were almost no other cars out though, which is the only reason I decided to keep driving. The snow made it harder, but I was still on track to be home by the end of the night. It was just after the sun had fully set, and about 30 minutes out from the nearest town I just passed through, that I noticed a car on the road ahead of me. Their headlights were the only light on the road, in the middle of the blanket of snow covering everything else. And as I got closer, it was clear that they were stuck, or at least not moving. Their car was sideways on the road, with their hazard lights flickering, and a man was standing out in the cold next to it. Obviously, with the snow and cold, I really didn't want to stop, but it seemed I didn't have a choice. His car was blocking most of the road off that was paved. I parked just behind him. The man immediately started waving at me and walked up to my window. My car slid and got stuck there. "Can you help me push it out?" He spoke slowly, like his English wasn't the best, but hoping I could get back on the road as soon as possible, I agreed to help him. The car didn't really look like it was in too much snow, so maybe just a little push might actually be enough. I threw my hat and gloves on, then got out. The wind hitting my face and snow instantly soaking me made me wonder why the guy even got out of his car. Didn't just call for help. My face and hands were already getting numb, so I hurried to the back of his car and waited for him to get his gloves. It was too dark to see anything through the windows, and after a little bit of standing back there waiting, I looked around to see what was taking him so long. He was still leaning into the front seat as if looking for his gloves, but I thought I heard him talking. A second later, he came back out and looked at me. Were you talking to me?" I asked. He looked concerned, but said he was just talking to himself. He smiled, then walked around to the back to help me push. I couldn't help but feel like something had changed though. His whole demeanor and the situation just felt different. Although I didn't hear what he said, it didn't really sound like he was talking to himself. But if someone else was in the car, then why was he out here alone and asking for my help? All these thoughts came rushing through my head, and I guess for a few seconds I was kind of spaced out. So much so that I didn't notice the men staring at me. His smile had dropped, and he had an eerie look in his eyes, like they were hollow and lifeless, completely opposite of what he looked like before. I didn't even hesitate, beginning to hurry back to my car. Just then, several doors from the car I was just behind opened, and 3 more men got out, rushing toward me. I sprinted into my driver's seat, and thank goodness I left my car on, because I put it straight in drive and rolled past them, almost hitting one on the way out. I was terrified of possibly getting stuck in the snowbank, as the path around their car was very thin. But thankfully I made it around and was able to get away. I put in a report with the police at the closest town, but there were never any updates as far as I know. I'm assuming the men weren't really stuck and probably left right after I did. I don't know what those men were up to. Of course I had my guesses, but if I had stayed and didn't leave right when I did, who knows where I'd be. This was last year. It was late November, and this was the first snowfall of the season. It wasn't supposed to be anything too much, just a couple inches of snow. I got home from work around 8, and by then the snow had already started. I heated up some leftover pizza and stayed downstairs for a couple hours. Around 10, I went upstairs to my bedroom, sitting at my desk with my laptop. Before I could even open up something to watch, I heard something right above me. It sounded like a thud in the ceiling. I thought it was likely the snow weighing down on the roof and was probably nothing to be concerned about. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned at all, though. This was my first winter at this house, and it wasn't in the best shape, so part of me was a little worried about any possible leaks or other problem. I tried to not think about it too much and continued looking for something to watch. But then it happened again. A thud resonating through the ceiling. I looked up and the thuds continued, sounding almost in a straight line across the ceiling. I was genuinely worried now. I got up and grabbed my winter jacket, then hurried out the front door and looked up at the roof. Unexpectedly, the side of the roof that my bedroom was under, there was no snow on it. It had all slid off and fell into a pile in front of the house. I looked at the other side of the roof, and the snow was still there. I then looked at my neighbors' homes, and all of them still had snow sitting on the roofs like normal. The way the snow had fallen off just one side of my roof didn't seem natural, like something was either wrong with my roof or something else had made this happen. Probably whatever those thuds were that I was hearing. With no more answers to find outside, and my whole body starting to shiver from the cold, I walked back to the front door. I opened it and hurried inside, stomping my boot on the doormat. When I looked up, though, my heart almost stopped. There were puddles of water going across the hallway. I stayed still and looked around, seeing water going through the living room and even up the stairs next to me. It only took me a second to see a boot print in one of the puddles, and I immediately turned right back around and headed out the door. I stood by the road and called the police, shivering as I tried to tell them my situation. About 30 seconds into the call, I saw something move past one of the windows in my bedroom, and moments later, a figure stood behind the glass, looking down at me. They only stayed for a second, then backed away. I didn't see anything else the rest of the time that I waited for the police. As I was waiting, though, I put together most of the pieces in my mind. Someone had made it up on the roof, making the snow fall as they walked across. There were several windows they could have gotten in from that I honestly had no idea if they were locked or not. When police arrived, they didn't find the intruder inside anymore, but they basically confirmed my theory. There were multiple trees going over top my house that anyone could easily climb, and with the windows being accessible, it made for an easy target. At least the officers think that that's the reason they broke in, just because I was an easy target. Nothing was missing though, and the way the shoe prints went through the whole house felt eerily like them looking for me. What's crazy is that I must have gone outside to check on the roof at the exact time they got in through the window. If I was any later, I would have been face to face with them, or if I'd gone back inside sooner, they might have not left tracks through the house yet for me to immediately notice. It's been nearly an entire year since this, and so far nothing else has happened. Maybe it was just a one-time attempt, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe with all the uncertainties of what happened that night. It was mid-December. I was only 17 at the time, and every year just before Christmas week, my mom had to go on a 3-day business trip for work. Being an only child that lived just with my mom, I'd spend these days that she was gone, home alone. Usually she'd leave just before winter break, so I'd be in school for most of the day. But this year she left the same day that our school let out for the holidays. I had the house to myself and wanted nothing more than to stay inside and chill all day. Our city was going through somewhat of a snowstorm, so I couldn't really leave the house anyway. I made some of the food that was left for me and found a new movie to watch. I had to pause it several times throughout the couple hours though, because the wind and snow would suddenly pick up and get really loud. It seems like every time I looked outside, the weather was worse. Then, around 7 or 8, someone was walking up to the front door. I could hear their footsteps kicking against the snow, and they coughed several times as they slowly made their way up to the porch. I didn't have a clue who it could be. I paused everything and looked at the door, waiting for them to knock or ring the doorbell. As more time passed though, I could feel myself getting nervous as something didn't feel right. I want to say I waited 3 or 4 minutes, not hearing anything, before I went up to the door and looked outside. Nobody was there. I could see the footsteps coming right up to the door, then going back the way they came. I was really confused how clearly I heard them walk up, but somehow I didn't hear them leave. Also, with the snowstorm outside, what reason could someone have to come up to my house? I think the only reason I could settle on was that the snow made it difficult to see, and they mistook my house for theirs. Maybe they realized once they got up to the porch and didn't want to alarm anyone, so they quietly left. It's probably a bit of a stretch, but I guess it was possible. After a while, I'd mostly stopped thinking about the situation and was more caught up worrying about the storm. The power cut out a few times, lasting for several minutes before it came back on. Because of that, I couldn't really watch TV or anything, so I just sat on the couch and scrolled on my phone. It was maybe around 11 when, through the harsh wind, I heard a thump against the house. I initially ignored it, but only a few moments later, the power cut out again. Thinking the thump might have caused it, I got up. It sounded like it was from the side, near the kitchen, so I turned my phone light on, then walked over and looked around. I thought it was probably just a coincidence that the power shut off right after I heard the thump, but I just wanted to be sure nothing happened. I didn't see anything, and I started to walk away. Hey! I jumped and looked at the back door, seeing a man standing against the other side. The back porch light wasn't on, so he was mostly covered by the dark. I could only see his face peering in at me. "Hey kid, would you get the door for me? It's freezing out here," he said, putting his hand on the door and trying to open it. My head wasn't fully grasping the situation yet, and I kind of just stood there and stared at him. "Kid, get the door, please." Something gave me a bad feeling. I knew better than to trust this guy, even though it was a blizzard outside. The man started coughing, and I started to back off, and the man's face instantly fell into a disturbing frown. "Open the fucking door," he yelled, banging his fist against it several times. I ran back to the couch and got my phone. I then stood in the hallway and watched the man as I dialed 911. My phone was struggling to hold service and kept dropping the call, but after a few tries, I was able to get through long enough to ask for help. The man at the door continued to yell at me and hit the door, but eventually ran off. I'm assuming the snowstorm caused some trouble for the police, as they didn't make it until nearly 30 minutes after. I told them what I could, and I called my mom to let her know what happened. Nobody really knew what to think of it. He could have been stalking me and trying to guilt me into letting him in, or he could have actually been in need of help, although it's unlikely. I never saw him again after that night, though. I work at a gas station. I'd been there for several years, and this night was one that I assumed would be like all the rest. I came in at 8 and took over for the day worker, who went home right away. The first couple hours went by quickly, as there were still customers coming in regularly to buy a few things or to pay for gas with cash. Between 11 and 12, it slowed down to where it began feeling like the shift was dragging on. I kept myself busy for another hour, or at least tried to, with stocking whatever I could find. But then I was left with the dreaded second half of my shift. It was always slow, boring, and just not enjoyable. Around 1 though, a car pulled in and parked in the spaces by the entrance door. A few other cars had come through recently, but just to get gas real quick. Very rarely would someone actually park in the spots and come into the store this late into the night. I stood up straight and tried to rub the tired look off my face, expecting them to come in. A couple minutes went by though, and they didn't. I leaned over the counter and looked out the glass door, but couldn't really see anything. The reflections on the door were blocking any way for me to see inside their car. Maybe they were just taking a break from a long drive. I didn't bother caring too much about it. I sat back and pulled on my phone. I spaced out, reading through random articles and whatnot for probably 20 or so minutes. During that time, I never heard anything or saw anything. But eventually I looked up from my phone and my heart almost stopped. There was a guy inside the store, standing in one of the aisles and looking right at me. His eyes darted away as soon as I saw him. This guy looked like he was mid-40, with a dark jacket on and a scruffy beard. I never saw or heard him enter, so how the hell did he get in? While my mind was racing, I just watched as the man kept walking around, glancing over at me a few times to see if I was looking, like he was planning to do something as soon as I looked away. Then after just 30 seconds, he suddenly hurried toward the front door and ran outside. I got up and ran to look out. This was when I noticed the car was still there, but the guy walked right past it and just out to the road until I could no longer see him. I immediately went to the cameras to see how he got in and figure out what was going on. It only took me a minute to find the footage of him slowly and quietly getting out of the car, then going to the back of the gas station. There were no cameras back there, but those doors were never locked, since the gas station was technically always open anyway. What's really odd is that there were 15 minutes between the time he went around to the back to the time he walked out onto the sales floor. Police came to help me investigate, ultimately finding the car he left to have been a stolen vehicle from months ago. They didn't know anything about the guy or his motives. Sneaking around though, he clearly had something else intended for that night, and I think I was really lucky that for one reason or another, he decided not to go through with it. I was on a week-long hunting trip, and I was staying in my uncle's cabin in the dead middle of winter. It was a long day, and I was about to head back to the cabin shortly. It had been snowing lightly on and off all day, but out of nowhere the snow picked up very quickly and turned into a very dense snowstorm. It was getting late, and I had a long way to walk back to the cabin, and I was honestly terrified. Because it felt like every minute that passed by, the storm was getting worse and worse. It was almost a miracle that I saw a light up ahead. It was a really bright light, but it shines dimly from where I could see, just enough for me to notice it. As I got closer, I soon realized it was another cabin. My adrenaline instantly sparks, and I was happy to have found a potential shelter. I would have had to walk miles upon miles in that blizzard to get back to my uncle's cabin, and I would have been screwed. I thought for sure I would have found myself lost in the blizzard searching for my cabin had I taken that route instead. Knowing what I know now, though, and with what happened to me, I wish I would have just manned the fuck up and found my way back to my cabin. but I could barely even see what's in front of me. And ultimately, that played a huge part in the final decision of me trying to get in contact with whoever was inside. I was just hoping my luck wouldn't have run out completely. What was the chance this guy was actually going to be a serial killer or something like that? I convinced myself that shelter was worth the risk. I approached the cabin and I knocked on the door. I heard footsteps that seemed like they were getting closer to me. I waited another 30 seconds maybe and politely knocked once again. The man opened the door and I explained to him my situation. He let me in with open arms and let me stay for the night, surprisingly. I told him I would be gone first thing in the morning. This guy kind of gave me the creeps, but being totally serious here, I wasn't that worried about it. People out here were known for being that way. Not necessarily creepy, but I could sense he wasn't the extroverted type, let me just put it that way. He barely spoke to me at all. He gave me a pillow and told me I could sleep on his couch in the main room. I tried making small talk with him, but that didn't go very well. I didn't want to bother him, so I thanked him once again for letting me stay, and I told him I was going to try and get some rest. I laid my head down on the pillow and I was getting ready to relax. The man was now standing behind me, so he was completely out of my sight. I was waiting for him to walk away, but he stood there for a good 30 seconds or so, and he didn't make a sound. Thought that was kind of weird, but still, I didn't think much of it. Then he turned the light off over the sink, which was the only light that was still on in the cabin at the time. Figured that meant he was finally going to lay down as well, but I was wrong. He walked away towards his room, and I started to doze off within minutes. What the fuck was that? I sat up so quick that I almost threw myself off of the couch. I was vacuuming all around me, but it was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. "Everything all right back there?" I asked. But there was no reply. To which I then stated, "All right, good night then." I was genuinely starting to get anxious, and I started to rethink my decision of staying there. Convinced myself that there was nothing though, and that I should just try to fall back asleep. I finally fell asleep maybe 15 to 20 minutes after that, and I have no idea how long I was out for, when all of a sudden, I awoke to the guy on top of me. At first he was really only just laying on me a long ways. His body was stiff as ever. I awoke within seconds and I tried to get him off me. He was much stronger than me though. He then started choking me and smelling me, like smelling my hair and touching my face. He even tried to kiss me. I managed to headbutt him, which in turn gave me just enough time to gain the upper hand and throw him off of me. I ran for the door immediately and I forgot. Shit. Just as I was about to leave, I realized I couldn't leave without my gun. Turned it back around to grab it, and there he was pointing my own rifle at me. I was close enough to him and fast enough that I managed to duck and weave and disarm the man. He was a bit older and that gave me the confidence to do what I had done. I hit him with the butt of my rifle and I ran out the door. It was still snowing out really bad, but I could tell that it lightened up just a bit. It was a long night and it took me hours to find my cabin as I had to walk at least 2 miles. And that's if I took a linear path to the cabin. I was walking around aimlessly for quite some time, just winging it, in 7 to 8 inches of snow in the middle of the night, with a snowstorm cutting my vision on top of that. I later found out from the police that the person who owned that cabin had mysteriously disappeared years ago, and no one has owned it since. That legit gave me shivers when the officer told me that guy was going to kill me. Scariest thing about it is, I don't think they caught the guy yet either. Two winters ago, my dad got me a car for my birthday. Not only was it new, but it was also my first car. I had just gotten my license a month prior, and my father felt that I earned it. I was really excited, but the only problem was that we had just got hit with a really bad snowstorm. Literally the same day, the day of my birthday. So obviously that meant I wasn't going to be able to do any driving anytime soon. Until the snow at least cleared up a bit anyways. I was really bummed out about the snowstorm, but I was thankful for the car. Skip ahead to that same night, I was sitting in my room, and I was pondering the decision of taking my new car for a spin. I almost convinced myself to do it, but I knew my dad would kill me if he found out that I snuck out and drove without his permission, and especially with how shitty the roads were. The roads were absolutely horrible, and I knew it was a bad idea, so I decided against it. Fast forward to the next night, I had been telling all my friends about my car and how excited I was. My friend Eric ended up asking me if I wanted to hang out that night, but I told him I couldn't. He later stated that he really wanted to get out of the house because I guess his dad was being shitty again or something. I don't want to get into this part too much, but basically from what I understand, Eric's dad is a horrible person that has been physically abusing him for years now. Eric said his dad had another drunken outburst and practically begged me to pick him up, so I did. After all, I wasn't going to leave my friend there all alone and not do something about it. I made my way out to the car and I had to sneak out my bedroom window. As I was driving down the road along the way, I noticed an old man in the middle of the road. I could barely see him because it was snowing quite heavily and I didn't have enough time to stop because the roads were so icy. But I had no choice other than to slam on my brakes in a panic because I was about to hit the man. The wheels lost all traction and I very quickly started to spin out. Before I knew it, I was swerving onto the other side of the road and I crashed into a ditch. I started panicking, not sure what to do. All I could think about was how fucked I was and that once my dad found out, he was going to literally murder me. A man from earlier that was in the middle of the road made his way over to me to my driver's side door and asked me if I was okay. Told him that I was fine and that I wasn't hurt at all. Got the creeps from this man right off the bat and I really wanted him to get the hell away from me, honestly. I politely as possible told him to leave me alone and that I had to go. He got the hint and he stepped away from my car. I wasn't even paying much attention to where he went. All I know is that he continued walking the way he was going when I first saw him, which was the opposite direction that I was going. I reached for my phone so I could call my dad to pick me up, but that was when I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I began looking all over for it and I searched my car everywhere. I knew I didn't forget to bring it with me when I left the house because I vividly remember typing in Eric's address in my Maps app on my iPhone because I didn't quite remember how to get to his house. The only thing I could do was run home, and luckily I didn't make it too far in my car before I spun out because I would have had to have walked a lot further than the 3 or 4 miles that I had to walk. When I got home, I told my dad everything and he was pissed. He managed to pull my car out of the ditch with his truck and he had my mom drive it home. He ended up taking the keys from me, and he told me that we would talk about it all tomorrow, and I felt horrible for what I'd done. I've actually never seen my dad that upset in my entire life. As I was lying in bed that night, I was still trying to figure out where my phone was. I was getting really angry because I had no idea what I did with it. I couldn't find it anywhere. I honestly thought that in my heart I lost it somehow when I crashed and that it was buried in the snow somewhere. Even though that seemed extremely unlikely to me at the time, that's the only thing I could think of that felt somewhat logical. All of a sudden I heard something that sounded like it came from outside. The jump scared me pretty bad as I was deep in thought, and the last thing I expected was someone or something to be at my window. I chalked it up to be that it was probably just an animal, and I forgot about it completely with only a few minutes. I wish I wouldn't have let my guard down so fast though, because maybe, just maybe, things would have went down a lot differently than they did that night. All of a sudden I heard a knocking sound, and right away I could tell it came from my window. I turned my head and looked over at the window so fast that it hurt my neck. There was a guy standing there a few feet from the window outside looking in. Couldn't tell who it was or what he looks like because it was too dark. All I could make out was that he was kind of tall and had long hair. Like the guy from earlier, I thought. Couldn't believe what I saw, and I immediately ran to get my dad again. When we came back to my room, my bedroom window was wide open and my phone was sitting on my bed. I had no idea what to make of it all at first, but it had to have been that man from earlier that I spoke with briefly after the crash. He must have followed me home. Why the hell would he have taken my phone? And if he was attempting to steal it, why would he bring it back? If he was just trying to do a good deed, why the hell would he sneak through my damn window in the middle of the night instead of knocking on the front door like a normal person? Of course, we looked all over for him, hoping he wasn't still in our house. My dad and I spent over 20 minutes easily looking for him, but he was gone. We called the police, but there wasn't much we could do. With the little evidence we had, I could give them a description of the man, but that was about it. Just under a week later, I saw him once again. It was in our backyard in the middle of the night doing who knows what. I walked outside as soon as I saw him, and I yelled at him from the back patio and told him to leave and to never come back. I got my dad as well, and once again, by the time my dad showed up to the scene, he was gone. I'm not sure what the hell this guy wanted or what he was trying to do, but I haven't seen him since the last time I just told you about. I still get the occasional thought about him and that he's going to try to come back at some point, even though this happened 2 years ago. Needless to say, I learned my lesson that night about a couple things. Just a couple of years ago, I was going on a long road trip for work. I used to go on these trips often in my old job, but recent events ultimately led to me getting a new job. The roads were horrible, and if it weren't for work, I wouldn't have been driving. The snow was only getting worse, and it was only getting later and later into the night. I decided to stop at a nearby hotel that was up ahead, a few exits down on the highway. Hopefully the roads will be clear in the morning, I thought, or at least better than they are now. When I arrived, I went to the front desk and I told the worker I needed a room for the night. I paid for it and I made my way to the room. I was thinking about going to sleep because after all, I was exhausted from driving all day, but at the same time, I felt like I needed to move around. I had been driving all day like stated previously, so my body was sore from sitting in the same position for hours on end. If you have ever drove for a prolonged amount of time, then you would know what I'm talking about. I decided to get some food, and after I ate, I let my stomach digest, and I decided that I wanted to go for a quick swim in the pool. The hotel had a nice indoor pool, along with a hot tub. I was the only person at the pool, and it was quite relaxing and much needed. But then I noticed a guy out of the corner of my eye who startled me. He was on the far left side towards the back of the pool area, in a dark, dimly lit corner sitting down on one of the plastic chairs. I didn't notice him when I first arrived at the pool, nor did I notice him walk in while I was there. I kinda just figured that maybe he was a lifeguard or someone that works there, but he gave me the creeps. He kept staring at me, and every time I looked at him, he would look away. I started to feel weird, so I got out of the pool shortly after. I barely even dried off, and I walked back to my room. I put dry clothes on, and I walked out to the hall and headed to the main lobby area so I could get myself something to drink and a few snacks before bed. When I got back into my room, I turned the TV on and settled in before I was going to try and sleep to help me relax a little. It wasn't too long after that I heard a noise that sounded like it came from the outside of my hotel room. It sounded much closer, though. There was no one in the room with me. Not that I knew of, anyways. I heard the noise again, except this time it was much louder, and I could definitely tell where it was coming from. I was almost 100% sure that it was coming from the bathroom in my room. I panicked, and I sat there for a few seconds, probably trying to rationalize the situation I was in as a coping mechanism. Part of me didn't want to believe what was happening, I'm sure. I finally snapped out of it, though, and the noise continued. I walked over to the bathroom and I slowly opened the door. And what I saw was the most disturbing thing imaginable. It was the same man from earlier at the pool. He must have followed me to my room or something. I immediately tried to close the bathroom door, but he was way more than strong enough to overpower me. He ripped the door back open and flung me into the bathroom with him. He asked me if I wanted to make $50, and he took his pants off. He then grabbed me by the arm, but I bit his arm as hard as I could. He let go of his grip on me, and he slapped me in the face with his other hand. Luckily, it didn't knock me over when he hit me. I ran straight for the door, and I managed to escape the room, and I ran to the main lobby once again, and I told the worker at the front desk everything. He called the police right away and the man got arrested. He was in fact a worker at the hotel, so he was fired as well. CCTV camera footage picked him up sneaking into my room when I was getting snacks at the vending machine. I don't know how he thought he was going to get away with this, but I'm glad nothing worse ended up happening. I'm 32, so Halloween isn't exactly as fun and exciting as it used to be. Usually I just put up some decorations, and on Halloween night I'll hand out candy and spend the evening watching movies. This was in 2022. I spent most of my morning cleaning up my house and picking up candy from the store, preparing for trick-or-treaters that night. Then around 3, I left the door cracked open so I could hear if anyone was approaching, and then I turned on a movie. Our neighborhood isn't really the biggest, so we don't usually get a ton of kids. But this year it felt different. I hadn't had a single trick-or-treater for 2 hours. I got up and looked outside. The whole street was empty and quiet. I guess Halloween isn't as big of a thing as it used to be, but still, I hoped I would get at least a few people. So I stayed ready for any possible stops at my place. It wasn't until 6:30 and I got the first ring at my doorbell. I got up and went to grab the candy bowl when I noticed there was someone looking into the house at me. They were wearing a costume with some kind of white mask that covered everything but their eyes. Obviously, I had left the door cracked open, but it was still weird to be looking into my house like that. I walked over and held out the bowl and told them to take a handful. It was as they reached into the bowl, though, that I realized they were alone. It was just this one person, and something about them seemed off. They were taller than most kids, and when I got a closer look at their eyes, I could tell they were older. The whites of their eyes were bloodshot, and I could faintly see dark circles under them. I thought it was weird, but I really didn't care too much, since no other trick-or-treaters were out. I also didn't want to embarrass them by calling them out. Maybe they were just some older-looking kid. I don't know. When they walked off, I set the bowl down and went back to the movie. I want to say 15 or so minutes went by before I heard a sound that sounded like a footstep right outside my front door. Thinking it was another trick-or-treater, I got up again, but when I turned around, my heart skipped a beat, seeing a person standing inside my house. It was that same one that was here earlier, with the creepy white mask. He was standing by my front door still, but fully inside my home. "Can I help you?" He stared at me for a really intense few seconds, before he backed out and left the house. I stood in shock for a moment, before I went up to the front door. The person was walking down my driveway, but looked back several times as if they were trying to see if I was watching. I closed the door. Now this was strange. Not only did he enter my home, but why the hell did he come back anyway? I felt like there was no way it could be a kid now. It was almost definitely some creepy guy in a costume with some really disturbing intentions. I didn't feel safe with him wandering the streets on Halloween night with kids around, so I took my phone out to call the police and report him. I heard footsteps approaching the door again, but this time they didn't ring the doorbell or knock or anything. I quietly walked over and looked out the people to see who it was and what they were doing. Almost like they knew I was approaching the door, they called out, "Hello, I'm looking for my kid. Have you seen them?" "Hello?" There was a man, looking mid-40s, wearing regular clothes, like a brown long-sleeve t-shirt and blue jeans. I didn't quite trust this though, and I'm glad I didn't. The man looked around for a moment, then leaned a little closer to the door. When he did, I could see dark circles under his eyes and could tell they were bloodshot. My face went pale. I backed away and quietly continued the call with the police in the other room. After a few minutes, I went back to check out the front door, and the man was gone. Police made it a few minutes later, where we quickly found a costume with a white mask hidden in a bush on the side of my property, clearly having been taken off in a rush. This was the man's attempt to pretend he was someone else. Unfortunately, they weren't able to find the man that night, though. I just really hope he wasn't able to follow through on whatever he was intending to do that night. Obviously, with his strange behavior, showing up to my house 3 times and pretending to be someone looking for his kid, he definitely had something disturbing planned. It was late October. I was a sophomore at university and lived in my dorm room with a girl named Kylie. She was a good roommate, everything considered, though we didn't always talk much. She was very social, and I was more closed off. Come Halloween weekend, though, she invited me to come to a party with her at a friend's house. She really thought I'd have fun and maybe make some new friends. Plus, it was at an actual house, so I wouldn't be cramped up in a dorm room all night. I initially rejected the offer, but after a bit of convincing, I decided to go. I picked up a really awful-looking ghost costume at Spirit Halloween, and at 8, Kylie ordered an Uber to drop us off at her friend's place. It was about 10 minutes from campus, but this wasn't a very big town, so it felt like we were in a whole new area. It was basically an empty road with just this one large house on it. There were orange lights strung all over the outside and tons of blow-up Halloween decorations. We headed inside, and it was surprisingly not that crowded. There were maybe 10 or 15 people around my age. Anyway, we drank and played some games for several hours. It was actually kind of fun, and I was happy I went. By 1 a.m. though, I was tired and burnt out. I found Kylie and asked if she wanted to go, but she was too drunk and said she was just going to spend the night. I didn't feel comfortable enough with any of the others to ask for a ride, especially since they were drunk and mostly all dudes. I stood outside while trying to figure out what to do. I opened up the Uber app, but I really wasn't trying to spend $30 for a 10-minute ride. Not to mention, I probably barely even had $30 in my bank account. I was definitely a little tipsy too, which certainly fogged my judgment. I ended up saying screw it and decided I could just walk back to campus. A 10-minute car ride must be like a 35 to 40-minute walk, or at least that's what I thought. I headed down the road, leaving the bright light of the house, and very quickly getting into the barren, dark, and eerie section of the road. The streetlights were spread out really far, so I'd be in the light for a minute, then walk in the dark for several minutes before reaching the next light. It was pretty soon into the walk, though, that I noticed a car behind me. It was odd because it seemed like they were parked on the side of the road, which I know I never walked past them. But every few minutes, when I'd look back, they had moved further down the road toward me. I tried to keep an eye on them, but at one point I looked back and had suddenly lost sight of them. It was a bit foggy out, but I don't know where they went. Maybe they turned around. I kept walking, but increasingly got more uneasy, feeling like I was being watched from somewhere. 5 minutes went by as I kept walking along the side of the road before I heard a car engine behind me. I turned around and saw a car coming through the fog, and their headlights were off. They were slowing down too and came rolling to a stop right beside me. There was a man in the front seat with a patchy beard and a strange smile. "Where are you heading? It's a bit late to be walking out here alone." I just said I was okay and kept on walking, but the man inched forward in the car, matching my pace and staying right beside me. "I'll give you a lift. You really shouldn't be out here," he yelled through his window, but through his voice I could tell there was something different about him. As I started to say no thanks, I looked over at him. His smile was gone and his face was tense. His eyes stared at me with an aggression, like he wasn't giving me a choice. I stuttered over my words as the man suddenly stopped the car and swung his door open. He started quickly getting out. And just then, a pair of headlights broke through the fog. Another car was coming down the road. I sprinted to the middle of the street and started waving my arms for them to stop, and the creepy man went right back into his car. As the other cars started to slow down, the man sped away. It turned out to be one of the guys from the party on his way home. Though I only recognized his face, I didn't even know his name. I told him what happened, and he gave me a lift back to campus. I don't think I'd ever sobered up faster than when that guy jumped out of his car. But honestly, if nobody had come to help, I probably would have been on the missing persons list right now, with zero evidence on where I could be. It was Halloween Day. I was in 8th grade at the time, and my friend group felt like this year we were a little too old to be trick-or-treating. This would be the first year that we weren't going out though, and being that the previous 10 years we'd always trick-or-treat on Halloween, we were left without anything to do. I mean, we didn't know what else there really was to do. Most of my group decided to just stay home and chill, maybe hand out candy or whatever. But me and my best friend Tyler thought otherwise. We wanted to do something, literally anything. That night, I went over to Tyler's place, and we came up with a plan to explore somewhere he'd heard about. To the best of our knowledge, it was some kind of abandoned tunnel or underground mine or something that was abandoned in the woods just a few miles south of our town. Now, I'd heard of it briefly before too, but neither of us really knew what it was. Tyler was able to get some directions from a buddy of his, so with the plan set, we hopped on our bikes and rode to the other side of town. There were a lot of people out walking around, but very few cars. And as we got closer to the woods, there were way less houses, and obviously way less people as well. Both of us kind of expected other kids to have the same idea as us, so not seeing anyone out here only made us more excited. We locked up our bikes around a nearby tree, then headed down a small footpath that was right where Tyler's friend said it would be. This was very clearly not a real trail, just something that formed from other people going this way. It was muddy, overgrown, and really easy to accidentally lose track of. Several times we had to stop and turn around to figure out where the path was. Obviously, it was dark out, and Tyler only had one flashlight at his place, so I was just following close behind him as he lit up the way. I want to say it took about 40 minutes of walking for us to finally reach a clearing in the trees. On the other side of the clearing, there was the entrance to the tunnel. There was a small hole going into the side of a hill, and from that far, it was just completely pitch black beyond the entrance. We were pretty sure now that it was some kind of older mine though. Tyler walked up to the opening, and I stayed right behind him. He shined his light in, and it was honestly really creepy. It was extremely dusty and was just this rugged rock tunnel that looked like it was endless. At one point before we entered, I instinctively looked behind us at the woods we came from, and for an instant, I thought I saw something move. It was by one of the trees near the path. I immediately called Tyler to shine his light over there, but when scanning the area, we saw nothing. I didn't know if I was just scaring myself or if I actually saw something, but being with my buddy gave me a false sense of confidence. Tyler moved the light back into the tunnel, then we both hesitantly stepped in. The dust particles fluttered across the beam of light as we slowly made our way down. It was really quiet in there, and each footstep echoed through the tunnel for an eerie amount of time, almost like it was miles long. We didn't get too far in though, before we heard something ahead of us. It sounded like a voice. It was quiet, like they were whispering, but the echo carried the sound close enough for us to hear it. Tyler held his light steady as far down the tunnel as it could go, but there was still an endless pit of darkness beyond it. Almost like we read each other's minds, both of us simultaneously pivoted and started quickly walking back toward the opening. As we walked away, I could hear the voices behind us getting louder. Either they were talking louder, or they were coming up behind us. But every time I looked back, it was entirely darkness, even just 5 feet away. We finally made it to the opening, and just then, Tyler stopped abruptly. Standing just 10 yards away was an unknown man. He was in the middle of the clearing, looking like he was just walking toward the opening we were coming from. Both of us bolted out and straight for the trees. I didn't have the courage to turn around to check if he chased us. Eventually, though, we ran out of breath and slowed down, to which we were able to go in the general direction back to town. As we walked back, we talked about what the hell just happened. What we think is that the man we saw outside the tunnel was likely going to trap us inside, or at least block our way out. I mean, why else would a grown man be alone in the woods on Halloween night, exploring an abandoned place that he knew kids would probably be going to? It doesn't make any sense. As for the people inside the mine, it could have been other kids, or someone working with the man in the woods. We got really lucky, though, to have turned around and left when we did, because even 10 seconds later, that man could have been at the entrance, blocking our only way out and forcing us further into the tunnel. My name is Susan. During college, I was a babysitter on one of those Find a Babysitter apps. I got to work whenever I wanted, and I made pretty good money. Usually, I would just be babysitting for a few hours at a time, or maybe overnight, and I had several regular clients who rebooked me multiple times. I enjoyed it too. I don't necessarily want kids of my own, but I'm kind of the cool aunt who lets the rules slide just enough for the kids to get glowing reviews of me when the parents got home. If they were old enough to talk, that is. I did it for a long time without getting stuck with any nightmare children. But my luck did run out eventually. This one kid, Carter, almost made me quit babysitting altogether. I was already apprehensive to babysit him, as he was on the older side at 10 years old, which is about the age when kids get more complicated. However, it was for a whole week, Monday through Friday, so the money was just too good to pass up. All my classes were online, so I could study the whole time and have the whole weekend to myself. When I met the parents, I felt better about things. They were both very nice people, and Carter seemed like a normal, lazy kid. They said he mostly spent his time playing video games and had a pretty set diet of easy-to-make stuff. They told me not to bother trying to get him to clean his room, and just to keep the rest of the house tidy. At that point, I thought the week was going to be a cinch. But then the parents left, and Carter switched up right away. He started running laps around the house, making loud engine sounds as he passed by me. At first, I thought I should let him expel some energy since I wasn't told to enforce any rules about running. However, Carter bumped into a table seemingly on purpose and came very close to breaking a glass vase, so I had to lay down the law. Carter didn't take well to being told not to run. He got angry and argued with me about it for a bit before I sent him to his room to play video games. He left, but before he slammed the door, he looked straight at me from down the hall and said, "I don't like you," in the typical mocking tone of an angry little boy. That was definitely the worst possible foot we could have started off on, so to speak. But I didn't worry about it being much worse than that. Of course, it wasn't that simple. It seemed like Carter was intentionally testing every single boundary of what he could get away with. When I picked them up and knocked on his door to tell him to put them away, I discovered the absolute den of clutter and chaos that was his room. And God, his parents didn't make me do anything about it. On top of that, he had his game console in there, which he'd play at the max volume until I told him to turn it down. He was definitely disobeying his bedtime every single night, but I couldn't do much about that. I just had to ignore the sounds of explosions and screaming while I was trying to study. Carter wasn't just a poorly behaved spoiled brat either. He was also a little creep. For a 10-year-old, he sure knew a lot of dirty words and things about how intimate physical actions were carried out. On Thursday, I noticed he smelled awful. I knew I would have to get him to take a shower, but it was a horrible struggle forcing him to do it. After an hour of fighting over it, he finally went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. Then, for the first time all week, I had a chance to go into his room without him being there. I couldn't help my curiosity. I had to know what other nasty secrets his kid had. After a bit of digging, I found an odd little handmade booklet. It was titled, All the ways I want to kill Susan. The first page said, I hate Susan so much. If I knew she wouldn't tattle with my parents, I'd punch her. Then, there was a bad drawing of a giant fist smashing my face. Things just got worse as I kept turning the pages. There were lots of spelling errors, but the message was clear. Susan makes me put away my guns. I want to shoot her. Followed by a machine gun turning me into Swiss cheese. Susan doesn't let me run in the house. I want to cut off her feet. With a drawing of 2 bloody stumps and severed feet. If Susan wasn't so ugly, I would F her to death. With the full curse word. Followed by a graphic depiction of something I don't want to talk about. Watching her sleep in my parents' bed made me want to set the house on fire. The picture had me burning alive in bed, screaming for help as Carter watched. I was mortified. I quickly took pictures of everything and sent them to his parents. But before I could get any reply, I heard a voice behind me. It was Carter. He was fully clothed, holding a pocket knife. He said he was going to kill me. Then he charged at me. I quickly got out of the way and ran out of the room, slamming his door shut. I held it closed for dear life as Carter started stabbing the door. I was able to hold the door closed with one hand and called his parents to tell them what was happening. They didn't believe me until they went and looked at the photos I sent them. But they still asked me to stay the last night and wait for them to get there. There was no chance of that happening. They had a family friend come over to watch Carter for the night. I took my payment and packed up all my stuff, never to go near that neighborhood again. Even after taking a few weeks off, that freak monster of a kid scarred me. I dread to think what he'll become when he gets older. There's something extremely wrong with him. When I lost my husband to a car crash, it felt like my heart had been cleaved in two. I left everything behind. My old neighborhood, my friends, the home that Marcus and I had built together. Because everything was too painful. Our 6-year-old son, Daniel, and I moved into a quiet tree-lined neighborhood where no one knew us or our grief. I figured a fresh start might help both of us. Our little house was modest but cozy, with a large living room window overlooking the street. Daniel quickly settled into his new school routine, and I took comfort in seeing a bit of his usual brightness returning, especially after his first few days at school. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found him by the window, a tiny hand raised in an enthusiastic wave. "Who are you waving to, sweetie?" I asked, amused. "Oh, just a friend," he replied with a shy grin. I smiled, relieved. Making friends already, I thought. I saw that as a good sign. Maybe things really would get better here. The next afternoon, there he was again, by the window, waving down at the empty street. This time I approached him to see who it was. "You should invite your friend over sometime," I suggested, ruffling his hair and peering at the empty street. "It'd be nice to meet him." Daniel glanced up at me, his face serious. "Arthur's a little shy, Mommy." Arthur. I tried not to read too much into the name. Maybe somebody names their kid after their parents. Then came the oddities. A week or so passed and Daniel's behavior grew unsettling. I'd catch him talking in his sleep, mumbling words too quiet to understand. Sometimes laughing softly in the darkness. There were nights I'd wake up to find him standing by the window, staring out into the blackness. When I'd ask him what he was looking at, he'd just mumble, "Arthur likes the night." Then the worst happened. I'd been tidying his room. His crayons were left scattered across the floor. There, on a crumpled piece of paper, was a face. Pale, hollowed eyes staring up at me, surrounded by scratchy, childlike lines. In the middle of her forehead was a small, dark red dot. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was staring right through me. When Daniel got home, I held up the drawing, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's this, Daniel?" He looked at me in a way that made my skin prickle. A stare so cold, so distant, it couldn't belong on a 6-year-old's face. Seconds passed, stretching out painfully. And just when I thought he wouldn't answer, He turned his gaze to the window. Slowly, as if reluctant, he whispered, "That's Arthur, Mommy." I froze, swallowing the lump in my throat. I forced a smile. "Oh, why does he have a red dot on his forehead?" Without looking at me, he replied, "'Cause he has a hole there." Arthur said a bad man shot him. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just an imaginary friend story. There was something chillingly specific in his words. I pulled him close. "Daniel, how did you meet Arthur?" He looked up at me, eyes innocent and young. "He was there, Mommy, at Daddy's funeral. He was standing right next to Daddy's grave." A sickening chill ran through me, freezing my breath in my throat. "Where is he now?" Daniel's gaze drifted to the living room window. His little face was eerily calm. "He's not shy anymore, Mommy. He wants to come in." He paused, his mouth stretching into a small, strange smile. That was enough for me. I grabbed him as I rushed us out of the house. I didn't stop until we were safe at my mother's. My hands shook, my mind spiraled in fear, in confusion. I needed help, real help. For the next 2 weeks, we prayed. My mother insisted we go to church. She dragged us every day without fail. A bishop performed a cleansing ritual, muttering prayers over us as he sprinkled holy water on Daniel and me. I clung to hope, desperate for the nightmare to end. Slowly, gradually, the shadows faded, and the whispers stopped. The nights returned with their silent, ordinary darkness. And Arthur, he vanished. It was exactly a year later when I returned to the cemetery. I brought flowers and knelt by Marcus's grave. I whispered a few words, telling him how we were doing and how Daniel was growing up so quickly. As I rose to leave, my gaze fell on the grave beside his. A simple, unassuming stone that hadn't been there before. Curious, I stepped closer and read the inscription. Arthur Miller, an ideal son and a loving husband, gone too soon on the battlefield, fighting for his country. Everyone who knew him will always be proud of him. A single red poppy had been placed by the stone. Its delicate petals were bright and stark against the grass, just over a small circular indent in the stone's surface. Scar left by something small, round, and sharp. A shiver coursed through me. I could almost feel eyes on me, watching from somewhere just beyond the veil of reality. At that moment, I could have sworn I heard Daniel's small, haunting voice in my head, echoing through the silent graveyard. "He's not shy anymore, Mommy. He wants to commit. Commit." I used to babysit my little brother Joey a lot. He was fairly easy to take care of. He was only in kindergarten, but he walked home from the bus stop every day and could make himself a PB&J among other things. So he was pretty independent for his age. He was also very capable of entertaining himself with toys and drawing, so I got to do my own thing. One day though, while our parents were gone, I was bored and felt like Joey might be lonely. He was on the floor of his bedroom, drawing with the door open. I asked if I could come in and he said yes. I went over to him and looked at what he was working on. There were 3 other drawings on the floor, crude portraits of me and her mom and dad. Joey was scribbling together a 4th portrait, but I didn't recognize it. I didn't interrupt him though. I just watched it come together. It was a man, but Joey only bothered to draw the details of the top half of his face before grabbing a red crayon and scribbling a giant triangle over where his nose and mouth would have been. As Joey filled the triangle in with a bunch of swirls, I noticed that the size of the head matched the size of the portraits of her parents, being bigger than mine or Joey's, signaling that the person was an adult, whoever they were. However, when Joey finished the drawing and gathered the other ones to arrange them, he put her mom and dad together on top, then below them, me, the unknown man, and Joey, in that order, as if he was a kid like us. I asked Joey who the man was. He replied very plainly, "That's the bandana man," he said. I asked if that was his imaginary friend, and in the same nonchalant tone he said, "No, he's real." I was a bit worried, so I asked a few more questions. Apparently, the man wore the bandana so he wouldn't get sick. This was during that time period, so that sort of checked out. Joey also said that he and the bandana man played almost every night. That information struck me as very hard to believe unless the bandana man was imaginary, because I knew Joey had only been playing alone. Unfortunately, when I asked if they had been playing past his bedtime, he stopped answering. I could tell he was getting annoyed with me, so I figured I should drop it for the moment. A few hours passed and our parents came home. By then, Joey had put all the drawings on the fridge. When my parents saw the bandana man, they were also concerned. However, they weren't able to get any more information out of Joey than me. We all figured Joey had conjured it up after seeing a cowboy movie or something, and tried not to fixate on it. But the drawing was right there in the kitchen, staring at me every time I sat down to eat a bowl of cereal in the morning. I couldn't get the image out of my head. One evening, on a Saturday, my parents were going to some big dinner party and said they wouldn't be home until around midnight, so we were supposed to be asleep when they arrived. I got Joey into bed around 9, but I stayed up for another hour or so before I went to bed. I lied awake for what must have been 30 minutes. Then I started to hear Joey talking to himself or his imaginary friend. I knew he wasn't supposed to be awake, but I didn't get up to tell him to go back to bed just then. I was very comfortable and didn't want to move. I contemplated letting Joey get in trouble if he got caught, maybe just hollering at him from my bed. But after a few minutes, something else happened. There was a very light knock on my door. Then Joey's voice asking if he could come in. I said yes, and as he slowly opened the door, Joey said, "The bandana man wants to play with you." My blood ran ice cold when I saw a tall man standing behind Joey, wearing a red bandana as a mask. As I stared in shock and disbelief, the bandana man entered my room and approached my bed. I could hear his breath, heavy and excited. His eyes were wide with hunger. Then, Joey spoke again. "He doesn't want to play with me tonight. Just you," he said. Then he closed the door. I finally snapped out of it and screamed at the top of my lungs. Wow. I tried to jump out of the bed to run, but the man pounced on me, pinning me down. I kept screaming and trying to get away, but he crawled over me, keeping my arms down with his knees. He took the bandana from his face and stuffed it into my mouth. Then, he undid his belt and tightly wrapped it around my head to keep it in place. Just as I realized there was no way out of what was about to happen to me, I heard my dad calling out that he was home and that we had better be in bed. A moment later, he started scolding Joey for being out. Suddenly, the man jumped off me and ran out of the room. My dad shouted at him and I heard him start to run. But the man managed to get back into Joey's room and escape through the window. I took that crap off my face and screamed louder than I ever had, immediately beginning to cry. I sobbed for a long time before I was able to say anything about what happened. I told the police everything. They questioned Joey about it. The bandana man had befriended Joey one day on his walk home from the bus stop. Everybody was wearing a mask around that time, so he didn't stick out. He came into Joey's window every night and came to play with Joey, ask him questions about us and our parents, gathering information. When he knew our parents wouldn't be home for the night, he finally asked Joey to take him to me. If my parents hadn't come home an hour early because my mother wasn't feeling well, that would have been the worst hour of my life, and potentially my last. I met Jack outside of a restaurant at one of the lowest points of my life. My boyfriend of over 2 years was leaving me for my best friend. He said that we have lost our spark, whatever that's supposed to mean. But that breakup is now a blessing because here I am getting married to one of the greatest guys on earth. After exchanging our wedding vows and all the wedding festivities, we made our way out of the church and jumped into our car, ready to start our new life together. Jack had booked a small cabin for us to spend 2 weeks on our honeymoon together. Upon reaching our location, I was a little concerned about the isolation. but remained quiet because I knew Jack had to pull a lot of work into planning this getaway. We packed our things in a boat that visitors used to cross the lake. We began to make our way across the lake to the cabin. After reaching the house, I realized that the island lacked modern amenities such as electricity, television, internet, and running water. In fact, there wasn't even phone reception here. Jack saw my frustration and asked if I wanted to leave, but I said no. We're already here, so we might as well make the best of it. After entering into the cabin, I noticed over the fireplace 4 photos of 4 young ladies. I didn't think anything of it, so we settled in. When I woke up the following morning, I noticed that Jack had placed the car keys and all our money in a safe box, holding the safe box key near him like a locket. I asked him why he was doing that, and he just said it was for safety so that we didn't lose anything. I pushed it out of my mind and I started to enjoy myself on the island. I went for swims, sunbathing, and just enjoying nature to the fullest. After a couple days of this routine, it kind of became boring, and I was ready to go home. So I proposed to Jack that we shorten our honeymoon and go back to civilization. Jack, however, seemed preoccupied and disregarded what I was saying to him, focusing instead on setting up an animal trap. In the night, I was unable to sleep. I just wanted to go home. So in the morning, I told him again that I wanted to leave this place, stating that 10 days in nature is more than enough. Jack bluntly responded that 10 days was not enough, that I was not leaving this island anytime soon. What? I responded. What do you mean that I'm not leaving this island anytime soon? Jack's tone now turned threatening and said, "We are here to stay. You are not leaving." I now realized that the man I fell in love with truly has a dark side. To keep things calm, I walked off and went inside the cabin. The following morning, I began to plead with him, saying that if you love me, that you'll let us leave this place, that I just wanted to go home. But something about Jack suddenly changed. His eyes turned a bright red, and he looked at me saying, "You are just like the others." On repeat, "You are just like the others." He reached for the knife on the table, and he rushed towards me. I sprinted out of the cabin and grabbed a piece of firewood, striking him on the head. As he was on the ground, I grabbed the key to the safe box from around his neck. Then I rushed inside to open the box and took out the car keys and made my way towards the boat. While leaving this wretched island, I looked back and noticed that Jack was awake and started to swim after me. Reaching the other side of the lake, I quickly ran towards the area I think that we parked at. Making my way towards the vehicle, suddenly I tripped over something. Upon closer observation, I realized that it seemed to be 4 separate graves. Suddenly, I heard Jack screaming out my name in the distance. "Jill!" With no time to think, I rushed towards the car, but it refused to start. Jack was now right up against the driver's window, shouting at me to come out. Just then, I remembered that we always kept a gun in the glove compartment of the car. So, I pulled it out and I ordered him to fix the car. He told me to open the car bonnet, but it was a trick. When I looked down for the thing that opens the car bonnet, I heard a loud smash. The next day I woke up, tied to a tree with ropes. Jack's demeanor totally changed, as he just kept saying, "You are just like the others." Again and again, "You are just like the others." "What others?" I asked. This is where he started to explain. "My other 4 wives wanted to leave as well, so I had to kill them. But wife number 5, I was hoping would be different." "You mean the 4 photos inside were those ladies? The 4 graves near our car?" "My God, you killed them." "Yeah, I did. Then you, but next." He left me tied up and went to the other side of the house, but when I realized that he wasn't in sight, I rubbed the rope on a sharp stone nearby to break it. After a few seconds, he was coming back with an axe in his hands. I rushed into the house, saw the gun, and shouted at him to stop, but he kept coming towards me with the axe. So, I pulled the trigger, hitting him in the chest. He fell to the ground, unable to move. I stood above him with the guns in my hand, pointed at him. I couldn't finish him off, so I tossed the gun towards him and made my way off the island. When I was halfway to the other side, I heard a loud boom. My name's Ethan, and yeah, I've heard it all before. You're too old for this. But they don't get it. The Grinch isn't just a character to me. He's something more. I mean, I'm a sucker for this stuff. Posters, toys, collector's items, you name it, I have it. My house is literally like the Grinch exploded in it. People tend to think it's quirky or weird, but they don't see what I see. The Grinch was clever and misunderstood, a genius. But things went sideways last Christmas. It started in a flea market, just walking through, scouring over all the tables for any Grinch. I saw it. An old dusty Grinch toy perched atop some wonky table. It was unlike any other I've ever seen though. Fur matted, green plotting instead of richly vibrant, and eyes. In glow kinda almost like they're breathing in a dim light. When I picked it up, it was warm. Not warm like it sat out in the sun all day. Warm like if it were alive. My chest constricted, and I reassured myself that it was just my excitement. How much? Asked the seller. The old man behind the table didn't even look at me. Take it, he muttered. No charge. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I sat the toy on my shelf, right in the middle of my Grinch collection. It was perfect there, too perfect. As I gazed at it, a creeping, crawling feeling went up my spine as if it looked back at me. Then the whisper started. I thought it might just be the wind, or perhaps the neighbors, but it was whispered inside the house. Faint, soft, just out of earshot. They seemed to come from nowhere, then from everywhere, and it only got worse. Every time I passed a mirror, my reflection seemed off. My nose looked long, my cheeks hollow. One night, I swore I saw my face twist into a Grinch-like grin before snapping back to normal. The decorations around my house seemed different somehow. The Grinches on my shelf seemed to shift when I wasn't paying attention. Their smiles grew thinner, their eyes deeper. I tried to think myself into agreement with my mind, but the fact remained within me. I knew. And then the dreams came. I saw him every night. The Grinch. But it was not the playful mischievousness of his daily endeavors. He was taller and leaner, his green fur darker, more patchy. His grin went on too long, and jagged and sharp were his teeth. I envisioned him standing at the foot of my bed. He watched me, whispering things I couldn't understand. "Follow me," he said one night in a deep guttural voice. I wake up drenched in sweat with my heart racing. That was when I started digging. I needed answers. I spent days researching and surfing all obscure forums and old books dedicated to Christmas folklore. And that's how I found the legend of a cursed Grinch toy. According to the stories, it wasn't only a collector's item, it was a trap. It pulled people in, feeding on their obsession, slowly turning them into what they so admired. Something inside me didn't want to believe it, but the signs were there. Whispers, distorted reflections, and dreams. I tried to eliminate the toy. I threw it in the trash, but the next morning, there it was back on my shelf. I burned it, but it came back. Its fur singed, its grin even widened. I was losing my mind. Christmas Eve. That's when I finally saw myself. This time, however, it wasn't me. The face in the mirror was green, and its grin was stitched into its cheeks. I screamed and punched the glass, but the image didn't break. That's when I realized I wasn't just seeing the Grinch, I was becoming him. The next thing I remember is standing in my bathroom staring into the mirror with a knife in my hand. Blood was dripping from my cheeks because I carved out a grin. All I can recall is looking back at an awful distorted grin. Now I'm here, locked away in this mental institution. They say I'm dangerous, that I hurt myself and scared my neighbors. But they don't understand. The Grinch is real. It's here. I can hear the guards talking about me every now and then. Poor guy. One of them said, his obsession destroyed him. The other replied, yeah, and caused a grin into their own face. They don't know what I know. They can laugh all they want. But every night, I see him, the Grinch, standing in the corner of my room, his grin wider than ever. He's waiting. For what, I don't know. But I can feel he's not done with me yet. I visited my parents for Christmas last year. It had been snowing since October, so my dad helped me switch over to winter tires over a month earlier. That made me think I didn't have to worry much about road conditions. My family and I had a wonderful Christmas together, but I had plans to go on vacation with a friend the following day. Our flight was scheduled for that afternoon. I left in the early morning, still dark out, so I could have ample time to prepare for the trip and arrive at the airport. Unfortunately, I hadn't paid enough attention to how much snow had fallen the previous night. I quickly realized that the winter tires alone might not cut it, but I was determined to get home. Once there, I could just get a ride. Unfortunately, there was a dark and lonely 20 miles between me and my destination. I pressed on at a cautious speed. Everything seemed fine until I crossed over a small bridge. Then, out of nowhere, I hit a patch of black ice. My car rotated one way and started sliding the other way, completely out of my control. I rammed into a pile of snow immediately. But thankfully, I wasn't going fast enough to cause any damage to the car. On the other hand, the snow caved in under one tire, causing me to get stuck. I tried not to panic. I had never had to get myself out of snow before, but my dad told me how. When I stepped out, though, all my confidence was blown away by the brutally cold wind, and the realization I was completely alone on that stretch of road. When I refocused, I grabbed all the floor mats from the back seat and a box of cat litter from the trunk. I got on my hands and knees and cleared a path for my back tires, packing down the softer snow into hard ice. I laid down the litter with mats and tried as hard as I could to cram them under the tires. I was working under the light of a single flashlight, feeling like I was on a fast track to hypothermia as my fingers started to get stiff and my face went numb. Just as I was ready to give it a try, I saw a pair of headlights approaching behind me. I flagged them down, trying to warn them about the ice. They seemed to go over it with no problem, and as they pulled over next to me, I saw that they had chains in their tires. It was another larger SUV, driven by a scruffy middle-aged man with gloves on who offered to help. I declined, saying I was already taking care of it. But then he took a glance at my setup and said there was no chance of that working. He hopped out of his car, revealing a stained jacket over a large gun, saying he helped tow me from the ditch. I told him again that I had things handled, but he glared at me, demeaned. He said a little lady like me couldn't handle anything on her own, and that I was no good to anyone if I froze to death. I was offended. My teeth were chattering so much I couldn't go off on him for being such a chauvinist, but what I could get out was lost in the wind. All I could do was watch him pop open his trunk and pull out a long chain, which he looped to an attachment point under the front bumper of my car. Then, he told me to kneel there and hold it while he grabbed something to lock it in place. I managed to ask him why he didn't just tie the chain in a knot, but he snapped at me asking if I knew anything about towing cars. I tried to snap back by saying I never asked him for a tow, but he pointed at my floor mats and cat litter and said it was the stupidest, most brain-dead method of getting out of snow. If he left, he said I'd be stuck there all morning until the snowplows came to bury me. In the freezing cold, looking at my handiwork once again, I had to admit the tow seemed like a better option. I swallowed my pride and did as he said, kneeling at the hood of the car with the chain in my hands. A moment later, the man returned, handing me an open padlock. I noticed he was holding one hand behind his back, which as he stood looming over me, was no good omen. My inner voice was screaming at me at this point that my initial feelings about this guy were right. However, I tried to keep going along with things while still being extra cautious. So I kept one eye on him as I turned away to secure the chain. I only got the lock through one link before I saw him raise his arms over his head out of the corner of my eye. I looked over my shoulder and saw a hammer ready to strike me in the back of the head. I quickly jumped out of the way just before he slammed into the bumper. I yanked the chain out from under my car, whipping it across his face as he went to hit me again. He shouted in pain as I ran around to the passenger side, jumping in and locking the doors just moments before he reached the window and started hammering the glass. I crawled over to the driver's seat, praying I wouldn't be stuck. I heard my dad's voice again saying, "Don't floor it." So against my panicking instincts, I feathered the throttle until I felt the tires catch, and then I finally slammed on the gas pedal. I roared out of the ditch, speeding off to safety. The creep didn't come after me, but he smashed my window. When I got home, I called the police immediately and reported everything. But since I didn't have the license plate, they didn't really do much. The rest of my day was very strange, trying to go through with my trip after what happened. It's horrible to think that there's a kind of person in this world that goes around looking for people in need of help, just to take advantage of their vulnerability. I used to work at a 7-Eleven that closed at midnight on Christmas Eve. I worked that closing shift one year. I wasn't supposed to be alone, but my coworker called no-show. The night was painfully slow. After 11:30, no more people were coming in, so I started getting ready to close. I got almost everything done, and then I went to count the register. I was about to open the drawer when I heard a faint noise coming from outside. It sounded like jingle bells. As I paused to listen to it, the sound got louder and closer. I looked outside and saw a man dressed as Santa Claus. He was crossing the street, heading right for the store. While he walked, he shook a leather strap of jingle bells in one hand. He was staring right at me, even at a distance into the glass door. I could tell. He came all the way up to it, then he stopped just outside. He went silent, no longer shaking his bells, just staring at me. He had a strange look in his eyes. It wasn't like a crazy or high person. It was different. They were so empty, yet so full of joy. I looked away at the clock. It was 11:57, so I couldn't borrow from the store. Against my better judgment, I welcomed him in. He opened the door and took one step inside, then stepped on the floor mat, still staring at me. He made a sudden and unnerving series of deep shouts. Ho, ho, ho. It took me a moment to realize that was his version of ho, ho, ho. It sounded like one of those holiday greeting cards with a worn-out tape recording. Standing in the same spot, he asked what a little boy like me was still doing out. I replied that I was working and the store closed at midnight, but he said I was being naughty and needed to go to sleep so he could put my presents under the tree. I kept being straight with him and said there was no tree and that he needed to buy something. To that, he scoffed and said Santa Claus never buys anything on Christmas. No. Good little boys and girls were supposed to leave milk and cookies out for him. That's when he raised his strap of jingle bells and shook it as he started walking. He took the last cookie on display that I was saving for myself. Then he went over to the coolers. He grabbed a bottle of whole milk, cracked it open, then proceeded to unwrap the cookie and cram the whole thing into his mouth in about 2 bites, washing it down with an entire bottle of milk. I shouted at him that he was going to have to pay for that, but he just glanced over at me and jingled his stupid bells again. After clearing his throat, he thanked me for the milk and cookies, but told me that I still had to go to sleep if I wanted to receive my present. I said I wasn't going to play his game and that in 1 minute I was going to kick him out, but he just rang his bells again, then said he could be very patient. We locked eyes for the next 60 seconds. When the clock struck midnight, had told him the store was closed, and without skipping a beat, he started violently shaking his bells and screamed, "Merry Christmas," at the top of his lungs. I got fed up and went to confront him. I pointed to the door and told him to leave. And instead of listening, he shook his damn bells again and spoke to me like a child. He said he was proud of me for staying up all the way until midnight to see Santa putting out presents. But it was time for me to go to sleep unless I wanted to be put on the naughty list. I finally lost my cool and shouted in his face to get the hell out. In response, he took the strap of bells into two hands, holding them horizontally at chest height as he stepped forward to close the gap between us. I started backpedaling toward the register, not taking my eyes off him as he followed mere inches away. I told him he didn't have to pay, but he didn't care. He just told me it was my bedtime. I kept trying to reason with him, saying I still had to close the store. But then the man raised his voice, scolding me for talking back to him. I apologized, but he said it was already too late. I was on the naughty list, and since I wouldn't go to bed on my own, Santa would have to put me to bed himself. And I was no longer going to get what I wanted for Christmas. Before I could ask what he meant, I realized I was backed up against the counter and he was right on top of me. Suddenly, he pushed me down and wrapped the leather strap of bells around my neck, squeezing and pressing into it with all his weight. I kicked and fought against him, trying to pull the strap away, but I was completely overpowered. All I could hear was him screaming, "Ho, ho, ho, Merry Christmas." As the seconds passed, my vision faded and my strength vanished. The last thing I remember is him getting in my face and whispering. Nothing was stirring, not even a mouse. Then, everything went black. I could no longer feel. I don't know how long I was like that, but to my surprise, I woke up in a daze. I hadn't been moved, but now there was a horrid sensation in my mouth. I grabbed for it and pulled out a dead rat. I threw it across the store. Looking at it, I realized that its entire nose and mouth were covered in red wax, like it had been suffocated to death prior to being stuffed in my mouth. I would have taken a lump of coal in my mouth over a dead Rudolph rat any day. When I got up, I called the police. Apparently, the Santa Claus guy had been terrorizing and assaulting people with his demented Santa Claus act all night. But my case appeared to be the worst. I always hoped they would find the guy, but many years had passed, and I hadn't heard anything about it. I was on my way to deliver an order from the sandwich shop I worked for. It was a quiet night, around 11 or so. I had my music playing in my car, and I was just running through the motions of the delivery. On my way to their neighborhood, I pulled up to a red light. There was nobody else at the intersection, but for some reason, the light stayed red for what felt like an abnormal amount of time. As I sat there and stared at the light, waiting for it to change, a car pulled up beside me. I only glanced over for a second, not wanting to make that awkward eye contact, but their windows were heavily tinted, like definitely more than what was legal, as I couldn't see a single thing through them. The car itself was black as well, maybe an old Toyota or something. I can't really pinpoint what it was, but I got a really uneasy feeling about them. It could have just been that we were the only two on the road. I'm really not sure. Eventually the light turned green, and I started going. I didn't get very far though, before noticing they hadn't moved. They were still parked at the intersection. Once I got further down the road, I shrugged it off and just thought it was weird and nothing else. A couple minutes later, I pulled off into the section of housing that the delivery was in. I'd say neighborhood, but it wasn't really a neighborhood. It was just a line of 10 or so houses leading to a dead end. Something about it seemed really off-putting. Of all the houses on the street, not a single one had a light on. I 100% would have thought these places were abandoned, if not for the fact that the houses themselves looked really nice. They looked like ordinary neighborhood homes, with not a single sign of anything wrong with them. I figured it had to just be a coincidence that every resident down the street had their lights off. Anyway, the address I had was for the second to last house. I pulled up and parked on the curb, getting out with the order and walking up to the door. I was hoping I'd at least see some sort of light coming through the windows of this house, because it was the one I was delivering to. But standing on the porch, I didn't see any light. Reluctantly, I knocked on the door. When I did, the door swung a bit from its hinges, like it wasn't properly shut or locked. Now this was even more odd. Sandwich delivery, anyone home? It was completely silent. No response, and not even the slightest sound from inside the house. I was gonna leave, but just to be sure I didn't miss anything, I cracked the door open a little further. I could see a hallway and a room. Both were empty of any furniture or decorations, not even a single picture on the wall. It only took a few seconds before dust started coming through the doorway too. I shut it and backed up from the porch. I was very confused and slightly worried. As I walked back down to my car though, I noticed something down the road. A few houses back, there was a small black car that wasn't there when I pulled in. Its headlights were off and it was parked. Once I saw the tinted windows, I immediately recognized it. I felt my face go white, knowing this could not possibly be a coincidence at this point. I started to hurry to my car, but as I got just a few feet away from the road, I saw something move in the reflection of one of the windows. I wasn't sure what it was that I saw, but I stopped in place. I was standing near the passenger door, and through the window, my eyes fell on the back seat. It was dark, but there was something blocking the back window. It only took me about a second for me to realize what I saw. I turned and bolted back to the house. As I did, the back door to my car swung open, and a man in a black hoodie and black pants came running out. He didn't chase me though. He ran straight down to the road and into his car. I stayed on the porch, and with my heart pounding, I dialed 911. I probably could have gotten in my car and left at that point, but I was too scared to really think straight. Police arrived and immediately told me that this whole street was unoccupied, as the homes were new builds. Guess that explains why I thought they looked so nice and not abandoned. What I definitely didn't expect was to hear them say that they've had multiple reports this past week, very similar to mine. The guy would order something for delivery with a fake name and address, then follow the driver. What happened to me was the closest call of any of them though. The guy had snuck inside my car, was waiting for me to get in, maybe even drive away. Who knows what he was trying to do. Unfortunately, there haven't been any updates on finding him. I was 20 and worked with my parents at a really small takeout restaurant. We specialized in to-go orders. I was in college at the time and was on a very hectic schedule, but my parents were kind enough to offer me a laid-back position just as a general worker. Usually just working the to-go table or cleaning up the place after closing hours. This was during early December, and with finals coming up, I didn't have much time to work during the day, so I was taking up mostly late night shifts where I'd just clean for a few hours, then head home. One of the nights I was working, I noticed around an hour into my shift that a car was parked in the parking lot. The way our restaurant was laid out, it was a standalone shop with a tiny parking lot in front of it, so there was no crossover between other stores or businesses. I thought whoever parked there probably just didn't think anyone would care. And they were right, because I really didn't care. 20 or so minutes later, they left. However, the next night, around the same time, the car pulled into the parking lot again. The first time it was fine, because I thought it was just a one-time thing, but coming back again was strange. I walked up to the front of the building and looked out. It was an older gray sedan with dark windows. They didn't seem to be trying to hide or anything, because they were facing right at the building and they kept their headlights on. I double-checked that the doors were locked before getting back to cleaning. It was hard not to feel like they were watching me through the giant glass front windows, but just like last time, they left not too long after. I finished up my work and clocked out an hour later. Walking to my car in the parking lot, I felt really uneasy. I knew they had left, but it was just concerning that the same car came by 2 nights in a row for seemingly no reason. This drove home and got some rust. Having a lot of schoolwork to do, I decided to take off the next night, so I didn't return to work until the following night. The whole time I was inside cleaning, I had this anxious feeling that made me constantly look out the windows, expecting that car to come back at any point. But I never saw them pull in. I was inside for nearly 3 hours and finished everything I had to do. And not having seen the car come by this night, I felt like maybe it really was all nothing. I packed my stuff up and headed out, locking the door behind me. As I walked through the parking lot, that anxious and uneasy feeling rushed back to me. It felt like I suddenly got a burst of adrenaline, making me sweat and look in all directions. Then, as I was halfway across and standing out in the open, my eyes spotted a car sitting in the far back of the parking lot, away from all the street lamps that lit up the area. Within seconds, it started moving, quickly driving toward me. I sprinted to my car, but I could hear their tires skidding on the pavement as they sped up right beside me and slammed on the brakes. I stumbled forward, thinking they were about to hit me. I was only a few feet away from my car at this point, and suddenly the doors of their car swung open. I didn't even turn my head to look, having my focus completely on getting into my car. Footsteps rushed behind me just as I opened my car and got in. Through the windows, I saw 3 men wearing masks and hoodies sprinting up to me. My hands were shaking as I tried to get my car to turn on. The men started banging on the windows and trying to get the doors open, but I barely got it in drive and drove past them. I got out of the parking lot and onto the road, and from there I was safe. I called 911 and pulled into a well-lit gas station nearby to wait for them. Unfortunately, the outside of our shop didn't have any cameras, so the information the police had to go off of was minimal. I couldn't even see any of the men's faces. After that night, it's no surprise that I never saw the car or the men again. This was last year toward the beginning of December. One of my good friends was going on a trip with his family and would be gone for a whole week. He asked if I wanted to house sit his place while they were gone. We were really good family friends, so this wasn't all that unusual. I actually did the same thing for them last year as well. They had a couple fish tanks and a lot of houseplants that they needed me to take care of while they were away. And in return, I'd get to stay at their house for a week. I lived in a really small apartment, so I was always glad to take them up on the offer and help out. I headed over a couple hours before they left, just to hang out and get a refresher on everything that I needed to do. Once they left, I unpacked some things and got settled in, and around 6, I went out to pick up some dinner. Brought it back to the house and ate in the living room while watching TV. Only a half hour later, there was a knock at the door. I paused the show and got up, looking to see who it was. It was a man in his 30s. He wasn't wearing a delivery uniform or anything. He just looked like a regular dude. I cracked the door open and asked what he needed. He looked startled to see me, but quickly recovered and asked if my friend was home right now. He called him by his name, so I thought he might have been a friend or something, but I told him he'd have to come back some other time. He didn't ask anything else and just walked away. I probably should have asked what he needed, but I felt like he should have told me to begin with. I was sure it was nothing, but I texted my friend just to let him know who came by. He called me soon after and asked who he was, and after a brief conversation, he said he had no idea who that guy could have been. I kept an eye out for the rest of the day, but still felt like it was probably nothing serious. I watched TV for a while, then went around the house watering the plants and feeding the fish. Around 9, I started getting the couch set up for bed. I tossed a few blankets down and made a little sleeping area. As I did, there was another knock at the door. I walked over, more confused than anything, but was immediately unnerved to see the same guy outside the door. This time, I didn't open it. "Hey, what do you need? Can you come back a different day?" I yelled through the door. I watched as the man listened and stared at the door like he was thinking, but instead of responding, he just walked away again. I made sure the door was locked before going back to the couch. It was then that I definitely should have called the police, but for some reason I really didn't want to. Especially being at someone else's house, I was worried that this was all just a misunderstanding. Not to mention, the guy hadn't actually done anything yet. I would just have to explain that he came by twice and stood at the door. It kind of sounds silly, honestly. It definitely woke me up though, and I didn't feel comfortable going to bed right away. I stayed up on my phone and had the window curtains open so I could see if he walked up again. I probably waited for a good 2 hours before my eyes started getting heavy. I did one last check out the windows before closing the curtains and getting ready for bed. I brushed my teeth, then hopped in the shower to quickly rinse off. By the time I got out, dried off, and went back downstairs, it had been less than 10 minutes. I went around and turned off all the lights. Before getting in bed, I figured I'd do one last check out the windows, just to help me sleep easy. I looked out, seeing nothing but trees swaying in the wind and the empty road in front of the house. I stepped back, and as I went back over to the couch, my eyes drifted toward the front door, catching something off. The lock was sideways. I walked over, thinking I was seeing things wrong, but no, it was unlocked. I was completely certain I'd locked it, not even a doubt in my mind. I froze up for a second before I felt adrenaline surge through me. I turned around and crept over to the couch to grab my phone that I'd left on the end table, but it wasn't there. Someone had already taken it. I didn't stay a second longer, grabbing my keys and running out the front door. I used the emergency button in my car to call 911 as I pulled out of the driveway and parked further down the road to wait. When police pulled up and searched the home, they found the man, same one that came by twice, sitting in one of the spare bedrooms. When they arrested him, he didn't say a word, like he was completely mute. They found a forged key in his pocket that matched the front door, and nobody knows how he got it. My friend told me again that he had no clue who the man was or why he'd break into his home, but it honestly felt like there was something he wasn't telling me. Suspiciously, we haven't talked much after that either. I don't know what was going to happen that night. If I didn't notice the door was unlocked and went to bed, I really don't think I would have woken up. It was a normal night after work, getting home at 10. I was exhausted, but ready to stay up late in game. All my buddies worked early tomorrow, so I was just playing solo and relaxing. A few hours into the night, I heard what sounded like a knock. I took my headphones off and listened for it again, but it was quiet now. I thought surely it had to be a knock at the front door, as it was pretty loud, and I didn't know what else it could be. I went over to check it out, but nobody was on the porch. The more I thought about it, a single knock would have been odd if there were someone at the door. I still didn't know what it was that I heard, but I went back to gaming. It must have only been a half hour later that I heard another sound. It was a sort of click, like something closing. I immediately took my headset off and looked behind me. Again, the house was quiet now. I got up and did a walkthrough of the house. I didn't thoroughly check every inch of the place. I was just trying to spot any obvious signs of what I'd been hearing. The house was fairly old, so usually I chalk these things up to being the aging wood. After checking around and not seeing anything, that's exactly what I did, and I went back to my desk. I was still a little hesitant to put my headset back on, but eventually I did anyway. Only a couple minutes later though, a reflection suddenly moved across my computer screen. Maybe it was a shadow, I don't know, but I jumped up and spun around. This time, it was almost like I knew, without a doubt, that someone was inside my home and had just walked somewhere behind me. My desk was in the living room, so there was a long hallway behind it with 3 separate rooms, and at the end was the front door. I took a few seconds to recollect myself and think about which way the reflection moved across my screen, and realized it had moved from the left side of the hallway to the right side. There was only one door on the right, which was to my bedroom. It felt like in that moment, the silence of the whole house was deafening, making each second pass feel more and more terrifying, knowing almost for sure that someone else was in that room. I decided my best bet was to just run for the front door and hope whoever was in the room didn't jump out at me. After a few seconds, I forced myself to move, running down the hall and through the front door. I heard nothing as I fled the house. I called the cops and waited outside for several long minutes. They went in, and I still couldn't believe it when they pulled a man out the front door. I knew someone had broken in, but actually seeing it was really unsettling. He looked around 55, but was very large. His face was uncanny, with wide, bloodshot eyes and a disheveled beard. Even worse, they found 2 knives on him. It seemed he had no particular reason for choosing me as a victim of whatever he was trying to do, which I guess was supposed to make me feel better, but honestly, it didn't. It just means he was completely insane and would have done anything without hesitation had he had the chance to. I think I just got really lucky that night to even be standing here today. I used to work for a small startup company. I'm not even really sure what they did because I was just a security person, but I always thought it was a little strange that they even felt they needed a security guard. The office was really small and looked somewhat unimportant, like any other office. It made my job easy though, because I didn't have to parade around multiple floors all night. I got in at 9 and turned on the security alarm systems, then headed to the little security room that had all the camera screens set up. The place only had outdoor cameras, which were really low quality. The first couple hours went by slowly, with the usual nothing going on. Sometime around 1 a.m. though, I heard what sounded like a latch clicking shut. I sat there confused for a moment, then stood up and opened the door to the hallway. Everything looked exactly how I'd left it. There were only 3 doors down the hallway, and each one was closed. I walked over to each door, opening them and briefly looking around. The rooms were layered with a bunch of office desks, but from what I could see, it was all normal. By now, it had been long enough for me to start wondering if the sound I heard was actually what I thought it was. Maybe I just didn't hear it right. After all, the security systems should have triggered an alarm if someone had opened one of the main doors to get inside. So I went back to the room, this time leaving the door open to the hallway, so if I heard it again, it'd be more clear. Then I sat back and continued monitoring the cameras. I checked the footage from the previous few minutes, just to see if I missed anything, but I didn't see anything at all. No movement outside the building. Another 20 minutes passed. I think by then, I'd pretty much came to terms that whatever I heard was nothing, as I was back to not paying as much attention. Then, a sound echoed down the hallway. It was faint. A door opening slowly. I jumped up from my chair and walked into the hallway, not believing what I heard. I immediately saw one of the doors was cracked open. Knowing that none of the alarms went off and nothing had showed up on the cameras, I was extremely confused. I was sure that nobody could be in here. I crept over and opened the door a little further, revealing the dark office room. I took a few steps inside, but didn't hear or see anything, so I started to walk further in, going past each office desk. Then, as I got to the back of the room, I saw the slightest movement on one of the walls, like a shadow or something, before I turned my head and instantly locked eyes with a person crouched underneath one of the desks, hair and large dark circles under his eyes. He had a look of both fear and anger, like he was both mad and worried that I'd found him. The instant we saw each other, though, he started getting up. I had no idea if he had any kind of weapons on him, so I took no chances and started running for my life. I went into the hallway and out the front doors, which triggered the security alarms and automatically notified the police. I went a safe distance away, then tried to watch the front doors as I waited for the officers to show up. It only took about 30 seconds before the door swung open and the man came running out. He ran around to the other side of the building, and from there I lost sight of him. When officers got there, we downloaded the footage from the whole night, but nowhere in it did we see the man enter the building. So we don't know when or even how they got in. Obviously, the other question is why they broke in. After discussing it with the company, they said they knew nothing about it and didn't find anything missing. I have a hunch that they might have known more than they let on, though. Hiring security for their tiny office isn't normal, unless you have a reason to. I think it might have actually been an old employee that they knew was a little unhinged. Anyway, I stayed there for another few months, then called it quits for a better job. I never found out anything else about what happened that night. I was pretty young when this happened. I think 16 or 17. It was at my first job, which was just some trashy pizza place. They paid slightly more than other places, and I made extra from tips when I did deliveries, so I stayed there for a while. I don't remember too much about the beginning of my shift this night. I probably started at my regular time, around 6, and was scheduled until 12. But the whole first half of my shift went by like any other day. It was sometime around 10 that we got an order for delivery, so I packed it up and left to drop it off. The place was 15 minutes away in a small neighborhood. It took me a minute to find the house, though, because all the trees were blocking the address numbers, and a lot of the homes had long driveways leading far from the road. Eventually, I did find it, after circling back a few times. I drove down the driveway and parked closer to the home. It was one of those large houses that looked like it was built forever ago. I got the food and walked up to the front porch. It was hard not to notice how quiet it was in this neighborhood. It felt like I was so far away from everything, especially with the trees everywhere. When I got up to the porch, though, the front door was wide open. I'd seen a lot of people leave their doors cracked open before, but the way this one was fully open was a little bit excessive. Anyway, I walked over and knelt down to set the food inside the house. when a voice called out, "Hey, would you mind bringing the pizza in here? I'm just setting up the table." It was a man's voice, but they sounded friendly. I knew it was frowned on to enter someone's home while delivering, but honestly, it was a fairly normal request and usually didn't take more than a few extra seconds and typically secured a good tip. I stepped inside and walked down the hallway into the kitchen. I set the box on the table, but nobody else was in there. I'd just heard his voice only moments ago, and I never heard him walk anywhere else. I also noticed the house was extremely quiet, like no other sounds at all. I felt a shiver run through me, and as I decided to leave, his voice called out again. "Can you bring it in here, please?" His voice came from the other hallway, connecting to the kitchen. There was a single door that was open, while whatever room was behind it was dark. There was no light on. It also sounded like his voice came from right behind the doorway, like he was standing just out of sight. After a few seconds, I turned around and fast-walked back out the front door. I got in my car and drove back to work, and I never said a word about it. I thought I'd either get made fun of for being scared or for being stupid, so I just kept it to myself. Thinking back on it now, though, there was definitely something up with that guy. Nothing about that encounter was normal. I'm just glad that at least I was smart enough to leave when I did, because there's really no saying what would have happened if I went into that room with him. This was 3 years ago, just at the beginning of December. Where I live, it doesn't get too cold until late December, and we usually don't get any snow until early January. I go camping pretty often and typically try to take as many trips as I could before winter comes in, and then I wouldn't be able to go out for several months. I schedule some time off work for the first weekend of December so I could do one last camping trip. I chose a place an hour north from me. I knew it was a little colder up north, but I didn't think it would be enough difference to matter too much. Besides, I was prepared with camping gear that was also rated for cold temperatures. I headed down there in the morning, arriving at the trailhead just a couple hours past sunrise. There were 2 other cars at the trailhead, one regular-looking minivan and one truck that looked like it'd been off-roading, with mud and scratches all over it. I parked and began down the trail. It was definitely chilly out, so I put my jacket and hat on. Not too long into it, I passed an older man with his kid who looked like they'd camped the night before, so that accounted for one of the cars. When I got to the campsite, I figured there would only be one other group or person there, but it was empty. Just a flat grassy spot near a flowing pond. No other tents or people. I set my tent up on the edge near the trees. For the first little bit, I spent some time writing in my journal, but as the day went on, it got colder and colder. I got up and built a campfire to help keep me warm. It wasn't too long after that, someone else came walking down the trail. It was a man, maybe 40, and he wore a thick coat and a cloth covering his face. He had a small backpack, but when he passed me and went to the other side of the campsite, I noticed his bag was flat, like there was almost nothing in it. He sat down and leaned up against a tree. I thought he probably had a friend further down the trail that was on their way or something. But a while passed, I don't know, probably 45 minutes, and nobody else came. Also, the man didn't move. He was still just sitting against the tree and staring out at the pond. I didn't know whether to feel bad for him, or be creeped out, or what. But then, kind of out of nowhere, he got up and started walking over to me. Once he got to the other side of the campfire, he stopped and sat down, smiling at me over the flame. "Hope you don't mind if I share your campfire. It's much colder than I expected." I said it was okay, trying to be friendly, but also feeling a bit uncomfortable. There was something off about his smile. The rest of his face just didn't match it. His eyes were droopy and tired, which made his smile seem fake. "Did you bring a tent? It's probably gonna get colder tonight." He shook his head no, but didn't seem worried or concerned at all, still having that smile. After that, there was a good 10 minutes where we both just sat there in silence. During that time, I'd already made up my mind that I wanted to leave, but I was nervous about packing my things up right in front of him. But the sun was nearly set, so if I was going to leave, I'd have to soon. I stood up and went toward my tent, getting my sleeping bag from inside and rolling it up. I could feel the man's eyes staring at me the whole time, and when I turned around, he was looking right at me with that same creepy smile. He stood up, holding his gaze on me, then walked back to the tree he was by earlier. However, he didn't stop. He continued walking past it and into the woods, disappearing from my sight not too far in. I stood still for a minute, listening for his footsteps, but the forest was quiet. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I was sure he'd be coming back any minute. I hurried to get the rest of my things packed, and within 2 minutes, I was heading back down the trail. I left the campfire going, so that if he was watching me from a distance, maybe he'd think I hadn't left yet. The next 2 hours were extremely unnerving, walking in the dark and freezing cold, just hoping I wouldn't hear his footsteps rushing behind me. I made it to my car safely though, getting in and driving home. I noticed at the trailhead, the old truck was gone though, so if it wasn't his, I don't know how that man got there. Regardless, if I'd stayed that night, something definitely would have happened. The man was probably going out into the woods to get something, only to come back soon after and do whatever he was there to do. Or he could have been waiting out there, pretending to have left in hopes that I'd feel safe enough to stay the night, just to come back in my sleep. The imminent events of that night will probably haunt my thoughts for the rest of my life. This was in 2016. I used to live in a remote town with a pretty close community. The whole landscape around the area was flat, dense forest, so basically the only thing to do was go for hikes or go camping. Otherwise, you'd have to drive an hour over to the next slightly larger town. Me and my friend Matt would go camping a lot, and this time he said one of his other friends recommended a place that we could go. So that's where we went. It was only a 15-minute drive from the outskirts of our town. There was no parking though. We just pulled over on the side of the road. The trail was also very faint and thin, and not something that looked used very often. We walked down, and after an hour, we made it to the camp. Supposedly, there was a nice view of a lake, but his friend must have been messing with us, because it definitely was not a lake or a nice view. It was more of a swamp, like a dark green overgrown pond. It looked like it could have been nice a couple years ago, maybe. After laughing it off though, Matt pointed out a tent on the other side of the water. It was way too far to see anything specific, but it was just a lone tent sitting among the trees. Then my eyes drifted along the edge of the water, further down from the tent. There was a person watching us. They were standing along the pond, directly across from where we were. I did a quick friendly wave, trying to not make it awkward. We both assumed they were the ones staying in the tent. Anyway, we pitched our tents on a hill, away from the water, and carried on with our day. We played a couple games and had some long talks. During the whole day, we occasionally looked out at the water, and we both found it a little strange that we never saw the person near their tent. They were either not there at all, or just walking around in the trees further away. As the day slowly turned to night, there were a few hours where we never saw them. We walked around and collected some scraps to make a fire with, then propped up our chairs close to the flame and made dinner. We were just chatting and having some laughs when Matt suddenly jumped up from his chair. His eyes were locked on something right behind me. I stood up and looked. Standing in the dark, there was the outline of someone standing only 20 feet away. They had long and disheveled black hair and were wearing dark clothing. The shadows covered them too much to tell if it was a man or woman, or if they were holding anything. "Hello," Matt called out. "Are you okay?" I followed up with. They stayed there for a moment, then hurried away. I looked back at Matt, and although both of us were freaked out, we both nervously smiled, like, what the hell was that about? Honestly, this was so long ago. I don't even remember what excuse or theory we came up with for why they were there. We assumed it was the person we saw across the water, but that's all I remember. Whatever we came up with, though, it was enough for us to continue the night without being too spooked. Somehow we even went to bed, which, looking back on it, I have no idea how. We were just young and overconfident, I guess. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to Matt quickly unzipping my tent and shaking me awake. He was breathing heavily and had a look of fear in his eyes. As I got out, he said he woke up hearing someone outside, and when he opened his tent, he saw that same person standing right by my tent. When they saw him, they ran. He was really freaking out, and I felt like I had to keep a level head as best I could. Our only options were to test our luck walking down the narrow path in the dark, or staying at the camp. We decided to rebuild the fire and stay up all night. We had everything packed up, though, in case we needed to make a run for it. As soon as the sun came over the horizon, we got out of there. That day, after discussing it, we decided to put in a report with our police office, just to maybe warn others about someone out there that was acting unusual. We were surprised to get a call back later that day to have us come in for questioning about something. Turned out, the tent we saw belonged to a missing person that had been gone for over a month. They searched the area, but found nothing else. They showed us pictures of the missing person, and both Matt and I were sure it wasn't the person we saw, which is extremely disturbing. Likely that person had something to do with the disappearance of the other person, and had Matt not woken up and scared them off, I probably would have been missing too. This was only a month ago. It was late September, and where I'm at, we were having a lot of rain. Pretty much every day, it was pouring down. I work as an outdoor security guard for a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, so rain doesn't exactly make my job any more enjoyable. Luckily, the company I work for lets me stay inside on rainy nights, but it always made the shift go by a lot slower. Instead of getting to roam around outside the building, I just had to stand by the glass entrance doors and watch for anything. Anyway, this night I got in at 9, locking up the place after all the employees left. It was pouring outside, so I stayed in and stood by the door, and honestly just tried to stay awake. There was nothing to see except rain and the occasional thunder and lightning. A few hours went by. During that time, I just leaned against the wall and made a few trips to the bathroom. But then, as I stood by the entrance doors, fighting to stay awake, there was a deep, creaking thud. It echoed through the whole warehouse. It sounded like bending metal, or maybe a heavy metal door scraping open. It was enough to make the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I was sure it was nothing, and just a creepy sound because of the circumstances. But it was kind of my job to check on these things, so I walked down the hallway and looked through each of the corridors. I'd never actually explored much of the warehouse since I was usually outside. All I knew of was the one main hallway that had 5 or 6 corridors branching from it, leading to large open warehouse areas. I looked down each of these until I got to the last one. At the end, the door was cracked open. I felt a chill run through me, although I still didn't know if it was already opened or not. I walked over and opened it further. The whole room was dark. Hello. My voice echoed through the otherwise silent warehouse. After a few seconds, I started to step back and close the door until I heard something in front of me. It was a voice. It sounded like a man, either mumbling or softly laughing, somewhere in the darkness near the tall shelving units. Is someone there? What the hell are you doing here? I called out. Come here. He said something softly. What? Come here, he said a little louder. Still, I couldn't see anything at all. After a couple more seconds, I said "F this" and closed the door. I used my radio to contact the police and left the building through the front. 5 minutes later, they showed up and walked through the building. They came out alone. Security tapes were reviewed, showing what looked like a 50-year-old man with a dark jacket slipping in through a gap in one of the back garages. From there, he made his way into the warehouse room, where I heard him in. And disturbingly, on the footage, it looks like he was holding some kind of knife. He made his exit soon after I left. We don't know why he broke in, or what exactly he was trying to do by telling me to come into the warehouse. It might sound weak of me, but I quit after that and took up a day job instead. I was camping out in the woods in the back of my property. I have a decent amount of forested land, so I like to make use of it and go for a casual camping trip every so often. Just a 10 to 15 minute walk out, I cleared a spot for a campsite. There was nothing special, like any views or lakes or anything. It was just a quiet place out in the woods to relax at. This was sometime in the middle of fall, and on this day, around 4 p.m., I headed down there. When I got there, I began putting everything together, and while I did, I happened to see someone walking out in the forest. They were only 100 yards out or something, but considering this was technically my property, it was a little bit strange for them to be out here. My land was bordered by other neighbors' land too, so the only way to this spot was by trespassing. I wasn't really upset about it. I was just confused why and how they got here. They were walking away from the direction of my house though, toward my neighbor's land, so I just let it be. Over the next 3 hours, I saw nothing else and mostly just sat back in my lawn chair and relaxed to the sounds of the forest. The sunset fell over the trees and left the woods dark and foggy, so I lit up the fire pit I'd made and stashed it with some logs and sticks. It was just about an hour into the night, and as I was tossing more sticks into the campfire, I suddenly heard footsteps in the distance. I turned around and could hear someone running, like full-on sprinting through the woods, but it was pitch black out there. I just listened and followed the sound with my eyes as they ran past my campsite and deeper into the forest, slowly fading out. It was 100% a person too, from the sound of it, but I'm not sure there's any explanation for what they were doing sprinting through the woods at night. It made me really uneasy. I thought about packing up and going home, but it sounded like they didn't notice me or didn't care to bother me, whoever it was. I figured I was okay, and if anything, at least it was just a quick run back to my house. I kept the fire up and stayed outside for another 2 hours. Aside from the running earlier, it was a very quiet night. Around 10, I let the fire fade out and got in my tent, falling asleep soon after. Of course, I wasn't asleep for long though. I woke up to sudden footsteps sprinting toward my tent. My eyes shot open and I sat up, hearing the footsteps come right up to the outside of the tent, then abruptly stop maybe a foot away. My eyes began adjusting to the dark, and through the thin fabric, I could see the silhouette of someone leaning back and forth, like they were trying to look through it. Then there was the sudden sound of something tearing. My eyes looked a little bit to the left, seeing a knife sliding across the fabric and cutting a slit into the tent. Through it, a pair of eyes pierced through at me. I jumped up and bolted out of the tent, screaming and yelling as I ran into the woods. The adrenaline kept me going all the way back to my house. Then I didn't hear their footsteps behind me, so it seemed like they didn't follow. However, when I called the police, I looked out the back window and caught sight of a figure standing in the trees, watching me. When officers came, whoever was out there had left. In the morning, they came back out to investigate the campsite, but days passed with no leads. Not only was it terrifying that they were out in the woods on my property, running around at night with a knife and cutting open my tent, but they also followed me back to my house, so they knew where I lived. I was on edge, barely getting any sleep for the next month. So far, nothing else has happened. If anything does, hopefully I'll still be able to update you on it. A few years ago, I was driving a few hours away to have Thanksgiving with my parents. The traffic was horrendous for the first half of the trip. But once I got out into the countryside where my parents lived, the roads cleared up. About 30 minutes before I got to their house, I realized I needed to get gas. Just then, I saw a sign telling me about a gas station at the next exit. There was no other sign saying there would be anything else there. That's kind of how it is in the country. When I pulled off the highway, I saw that the place was even more depressingly empty than I expected. Aside from the gas station, which still had old-style pumps, there were a few other buildings that had been abandoned. I pulled up to a pump and saw a sign on it that said, "Cash only, no self-service." So I hopped out and headed into the store, noting that there were 2 cars parked outside. I walked in, figuring I'd see someone at the register and some other person buying stuff, but it was totally empty. The bell above the door echoed through a totally silent, still environment. It smelled dusty and mildewy, with a bit of rusty metal in the air, as well as the wafting odor of someone taking a dump in the bathroom. I waited at the counter for about a minute before I started to get a weird feeling, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I peeked around the aisles and saw nobody. When I called out for someone to help me, I didn't get an answer. Finally, I found the bathroom door, tucked away in the back corner. The light was on too. I walked over to it, intending a knock. But then it suddenly swung open, and a man practically jumped out at me. He said there was a spill in there or something, so the bathroom was closed until he cleaned it up. I laughed and said that was okay since I wasn't far from my destination. I clocked him for having just blown up the toilet, as he was sweating and breathing heavily, and the air coming off him was very foul. After I told him I just needed to pay for some gas, we walked over to the counter together. I couldn't tell if he was new to the job or just embarrassed and flustered, as he seemed to struggle to carry out the transaction. When he finally got through, he told me to have a good day. I reminded him that there was no self-service, so he had to come and pump my gas for me. He got really confused for a second, then kind of sheepishly asked me if I could try figuring it out on my own. I thought for a second, then shrugged and went along with it. I walked back to my car and tried to use the pump, but the thing was so old and weird that I got confused. I decided to walk back inside and get the attendant to do his job. But when I came through the door again, the man came storming back from the bathroom, screaming at me to get out of the store. He pointed to the door, and that's when I noticed blood on his hands. He realized I saw it too. We stared at each other for a few seconds, both of us unsure what to do. Then suddenly, he ran at me. I shoved him back, then bolted out the door. I ran back to my car as the man chased me, barely getting inside and managing to lock the door before he could get in. I frantically searched for my keys as the man tried to break through the window, frantically starting my truck and speeding out of the station. I tried to get back on the road as quickly as possible, but before I knew it, the man had gotten into his van and was still chasing after me. I floored it to get on the main highway, but he caught up to me on the ramp and ran into the back of my truck. He was trying to run me off the road. On the highway, he got into the lane next to me and started creeping up on my left side. I knew he was trying to outmaneuver me, so I hit the brakes hard, causing him to soar past me. Nobody was on the road around us, so I made a highly illegal U-turn over the median and started driving the other direction. I didn't want him following me to my parents' house. I didn't know the extent of what this guy was capable of, but he was obviously unhinged and dangerous. Thankfully, the switch-up gave me enough time to get out my phone and call 911. I expected to see the van race up to me again, but by then, he had given up. However, I was so far out in the middle of nowhere that the operator told me it would take a share of 20 minutes to get there, which I knew gave that guy plenty of time to get away. I ended up going to my parents' place, but before we sat down for dinner, I got a call back from the cops. They wanted me to come to their station and make a statement. When I got there, one of the first things they told me was that the body of the store owner had been found in the bathroom. His stomach cut open and his bowel pierced, mixing fecal matter into the blood at the crime scene. The sheriff was an older man, probably had 30 years in the job. By the look on his face, you could tell he'd never seen anything like it. I couldn't believe it either. The man I was in the store with wasn't even an employee after all. Just a crazed killer. I told him everything I could. Even how I realized the odor I smelled wasn't funny at all, as it must have been the victim's internal feces. Unfortunately, they never caught the killer. They never figured out the motive either. The best I can figure is that I interrupted an amateur black market organ harvester. Every Thanksgiving, when people talk about stuffing and carving up turkeys, all I can imagine is that poor guy's mutilated corpse. When I was 17, Halo Reach came out. My twin brother and I had played through all the Halo campaigns together, so of course we had to get the newest one. Unfortunately, our mom wouldn't buy it for us when it came out, so we had to wait for the Black Friday sale at Walmart. We saved up some cash from mowing the next-door neighbor's lawn. A new family had just moved in a few weeks prior, and even though they apparently had a son I had never seen, he wouldn't do it, and the father was too busy at work all the time. On Black Friday, we drove over to Walmart and fought through the ridiculous crowds to get to where they had games. Before we got there, my brother somehow got into a conversation with a girl from our high school. They talked for at least 5 minutes, making me irritate with him for spending so much time and energy trying to get with her. Our stated mission was to get in, buy Halo Reach, then get out and go home to play the whole campaign in one sitting, not bragging about doing yard work and asking for phone numbers. I kept trying to pull my brother away, but we got annoyed with each other. I was getting impatient, but I was also stepping on his game. He eventually handed me his share of the cash and told me to just go get the game myself and meet me back at the same spot. I couldn't stand listening to my brother talk about shared algebra teachers and house parties, so I went my own way. I weaved through the people and took a copy of the Halo Reach case off the shelf, then got in line at the electronics register to pay and actually get the disc. Right after I got in line, I noticed somebody get in line behind me. Soon after, I felt them breathing down my neck, like they were looking over my shoulder. I turned around, about to tell them to get out of my personal space, but I bit my tongue when I saw the guy. He was built like a linebacker, but as if all that extra mass was straight bone. I eventually managed to ask if I could help him, and he took a few seconds to formulate a response. "That's a co-op game," he said. I replied that I knew that, and I was going to play with my brother. Then, the guy shook his head and told me I should play with him instead. He started bragging how he beat every Halo game on Legendary, but of course, so had I. His face turned red, and he lied quite obviously about beating them with all the skulls on, which makes the game 10 times harder. I called him out for making things up. Then suddenly, He grabbed my wrist and squeezed me so hard that it cut off the circulation. He pulled me in right up to his face and growled the words, "Play with me." I was about to shout for help, but just then, I heard the voice of the cashier call out to us. He was half yelling to break up the scuffle and half just trying to keep the line moving, but I was fully thankful for him. While we had been talking, all the people ahead of me in line had gone through, so after the brute dropped my hand, I walked up and paid for the game. During the entire transaction, I felt him breathing down my neck again, but this time, he was literally fuming. I was scared he might do something like grab the disc right after I bought it and snap it in half, or worse, snap my neck. After I had the game in the bag, I turned around and looked at the guy before walking away. That's when I noticed there was nothing in his hands. It hit me that he was never waiting in line to buy anything. He was only there to talk to me the entire time. I took a step back and he took a step forward. I started to turn and walk away, but he was already following me. I panicked and burst out into a full sprint. I bumped into several people and got sworn at for yelling a bunch, but I managed to get away around a few corners. Then I found my brother. He was still talking to the girl, but when he saw my face, his mood changed. I told him we needed to go, and thankfully, he had finally gotten her number, so I was able to get him away from her. In the car, I told him about what happened, but he didn't quite get the extent of it. He didn't give me a hard time though. I guess he was on cloud 9 from the combo of getting a girl's number and being minutes away from playing a new Halo game. As soon as we got home, we booted it up and started making our way through the campaign. Night fell about halfway through, so I got up in between missions to close the blinds so nobody could see it. I looked across the gap to the new next-door neighbor's house, seeing that there was a light on in her window. And under that light was that same brutish creep that grabbed me at Walmart. My heart sank. That was the neighbor's kid. The whole time I thought he was an adult. Even through the window, I could see the rage in his face watching my brother and I play together. I snapped the blinds closed and went back to the game, trying to forget about it. Unfortunately, for the next year and a half, I was tormented by that freak. He never did anything, but he watched me from his house like a hawk, day and night. I asked my mom about it, and she said after talking with the mother, she learned her son had been banned from his previous school district for severe anger management problems, forcing them to move to a different county and enroll him in a specialized school to help him with it. I guess it was working, because I could see in his eyes the brutal violence he was barely holding back. I went shopping at Target with my friend Stephanie the day before Thanksgiving. The plan wasn't to buy much of anything, but to pick out what we wanted to grab when we came back on Black Friday. That way, we also could see the difference in prices between the 2 days and find out if the Black Friday deals were actually any good. I wanted to go to the electronics department and do some research on a new camera for myself and a new TV for Steph, since she was planning a movie into my spare bedroom and didn't have a TV of her own. I was browsing the cameras, holding one of the display models, when a Target employee walked up to me asking if I needed any help. He was a bit creepy looking, and he was already looking at my boobs a lot. But he was the only employee in the electronics department, and I was getting confused by the different aspects of the cameras, so I let him help. I told him I was looking to get into photography as a hobby, so I didn't want to spend a lot of money. He asked me if I was planning on taking more pictures or videos, and I answered that I would probably do a little both. That's when a very concerning smile spread across his face, and I immediately got a bad feeling about it. He said I would probably want a nice microphone and a ring light for my filming setup too. I told him I wasn't going to do anything like that, and I wanted a camera strictly for taking photos of things. Then, he pointed to my chest and said, "You mean those things, right?" I told him to shut up and that he should have some basic respect, and that he should be doing his job instead of hitting on me. Instead of apologizing, he said I could make a lot of money on OnlyFans with my body, and that he would be the first subscriber. Better yet, he'd be part of the videos too. I was about to hit this guy when Steph walked up to join me at the worst possible time. He whistled at her and asked if she was my girlfriend. She and I just had to film each other making out and doing other things, obviously. I finally had enough and shoved the display camera in his face. Then I grabbed Steph and we stormed out. I cussed and complained about that creep for a solid 10 minutes, declaring I would never shop at that Target again if that was the sort of person they hired. In fact, while I was still in the parking lot, I called the store and got a manager on the phone just to report him. I told her the name of the person who harassed me. Colt. That was what it said on the name tag anyway. My heart sank when she told me there was nobody on the staff with that name. And of all people she would know. Steph and I immediately felt a great sense of danger and drove out of the parking lot right then and there. We went home to my apartment, where I told Steph that I wish she was already moved in instead of waiting until December 1st, with sickos like that fake employee at Target in the world. It's really scary to live alone. She offered to start moving things into the room that day if I didn't charge her rent for the last week of November. But I didn't care about screwing my friend out of almost $200, so I jumped on it. I even helped her move. It was about noon when we started, so we were able to make several car trips from her parents' place to mine, getting almost everything she had except the bigger pieces of furniture, which we planned to rent a truck and grab on Saturday. She would have had to sleep on the couch for a night or two. That was fine with her. Even though it was late November, it was still 80 degrees out where I lived, so we both worked up a sweat and had to change in shorts and tank tops, which were still soaked by the end of the day. That evening, Steph and I felt much better about things. The next day, we invited some friends over for a small Friendsgiving. Everything was going just fine until the morning of Black Friday. Steph and I got ready to go shopping, but when we opened the door, there was a camera sitting on my welcome mat. I knew exactly what camera it was. The display model that I shoved into the face of that Target creep. I almost fainted. Steph didn't recognize it, so she picked it up and started looking to the photos. Her face went white as a sheet. I had to know it was on it. There were nearly 100 pictures and videos, all of which were of me, Steph, and our friends. The first was a video of our butts as we walked away from him after the initial encounter. After that, there were pictures of us in my car as he followed us to my apartment. Then, he photographed us as we carried heavy objects inside, wearing light clothing and sweating profusely. He even peeped through the window at a Friendsgiving. Unfortunately, he got several partially exposed shots of me in the bathroom too. The last picture taken was just a piece of paper with writing on it saying, "I told you so." That led me to assume he downloaded the pictures off the camera and uploaded them to the internet. Maybe selling them to some pervert friends of his. I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted to smash the camera, but Steph took it out of my hands before I could and called the police. We showed them the photos and I gave them a description of Colt, even though that probably isn't his real name. I asked if we could access the security footage at Target, but they made a bunch of excuses basically amounting to, it wasn't serious enough. Apparently, being stalked by a potentially dangerous predator and voyeur for 2 days doesn't warrant a woman any help from the police. Thankfully, nothing else happened after that. I guess the creep got what he wanted. I never stopped thinking about it though. The story takes place in 2016 on a nice warm summer day. I was out for a walk, enjoying my time off from school and work, just getting some fresh air. Any time away from work and school was a good day for me. I didn't like the job I worked at very much, and I was a bit of a loner in school, and I didn't have many friends. I would get bullied quite frequently, so that right there, I suppose, would be more than enough of a good reason for me to hate school. Anyways, I don't want to get off topic here, so back to the story. I was walking through this trail, and I had been walking for just over 5 minutes, I'd say, when all of a sudden I heard something in the woods. I genuinely didn't think much of it at all, as it most definitely wasn't uncommon to hear a squirrel, or maybe a bird or something every now and then. Sound continued for at least a minute, and the longer time went on, the more muffled the sound would become. Whatever it was clearly moving in the same direction as me, but much faster. I kept walking, still not thinking much of the situation. I was approaching a curve in the trail that took a sharp left turn, and almost as soon as I made it past the curve in the trail, that's when I saw him. There was a guy that was dressed up as a clown. I paused for a second, and I stood there just looking at him. He was standing directly in the middle of the trail. I don't know if you guys know about this or remember, but I'm sure you do. Just in case you don't, I want to briefly go over it. Back in 2016, there was a huge trend going around where people were dressing up as clowns all throughout the world, especially America. Most of them were just harmless teenagers who were being angsty and trying to scare people and get a good laugh or whatever. But there were people out there who had much more devious intentions. I've also heard some pretty horrible things that happened on the news, where clowns had been caught trying to kidnap or even physically harming innocent people. Anyways, I was taken aback by this when I saw the clown face to face. But I didn't want to seem like I was scared. Because if he did have ill intentions, which honestly I highly doubted at the time, I didn't want to give him what he wanted, which was to scare me, obviously. He didn't seem to be armed either, so I was sure I could take him should he try to pull something crazy, like try to hurt me or whatever. He made awkward eye contact for a moment, and neither of us said a word. Not until I worked up the courage to ask him who he was. "Hello, who are you?" That was all that was said. At this point I realized it was probably time to go. The man was staring at me still and hadn't moved a muscle. He then began walking towards me and I took a few steps back. Remembering that I didn't want to seem scared, I said screw it and began walking towards him as well. As we were getting closer to each other, my heart rate increased more and more. He seemed to stop when we were right next to each other, but I kept walking, all while not looking back, not even once. I then chuckled to myself when I realized I fully made it past him and he was completely out of sight, because I realized I got all worked up for nothing. Anyways, I finished with my walk and I didn't see the clown again for the rest of my walk. Fast forward to the evening, I was sitting at home making dinner, when all of a sudden, I thought that I heard something come from outside. I opened the sliding glass door that was in my living room and stuck my head out and scanned my backyard with my eyes. Nothing. There was nobody at all in sight. There were many blind spots that someone may have been hiding, mind you, from where I was positioned, but I chalked it up to be just my imagination and that I was overthinking. I shut the door and locked it and continued making dinner. It couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 minutes later that I heard an aggressive heavy-sounding knock that came from my kitchen window. I quite literally jumped out of fear and I hit my head on the cupboard that was above me. That was when I legit started to have a panic attack. Let me tell you, I didn't know fear until this moment. This was by far the most frightened I had ever felt in my life. I grabbed the knife that was sitting next to me on the counter and I tried to look out the window, but it was too dark for me to see anything at all. I rushed to my back patio light and I turned it on immediately. The second I turned on the light and before I was about to open the sliding glass door, I saw him. It was the same clown from earlier. He was standing right there on my back patio, only a few feet away from me. Looking back, I wish I would have ran out there and stabbed him or something, or at the very least scared him off, but I didn't. It's hard to say what you would do in a certain situation until you're in said situation, trust me. I ran upstairs to my room and I locked myself in the bedroom and proceeded to call the police. The knocking sounds continued and I could hear them all the way from upstairs. I had no idea who it was or why they were harassing me or how they even knew where I lived. Something tells me, even still to this day, that it was someone that knows me, which makes it all the more personal and scary if you ask me. I waited for the police to get there, which felt like an hour. They actually arrived fairly quickly though and made it here in less than 10 minutes, give or take. The knocking continued and it grew louder and louder as time went on. And I about shit myself when the clown started laughing in this very delirious, insane type of laugh. I literally thought I was just waiting to die. I thought that at any second the man was going to break in and attack me, that I was going to have to put up a fight. I thought to myself over and over how if he really wanted to, I'm sure he could just break through just about any of my windows in the house and let himself in that way. Finally, I heard police sirens in the distance, and they finally arrived only a handful of seconds after. One of the officers knocked on the door, and I rushed down there immediately to let him in. Of course, looking through the peephole first to make sure it wasn't a clown. I let him in and I spoke with him while the other officer searched for the clown. I couldn't believe it, but the clown was gone. Out of sight and out of mind, I guess. That's the way I like to look at it, because I haven't had a single incident ever since with any more clowns. Or anyone at all for that matter. Sometimes, even thinking back about this story, I can't believe that this in fact happened to me. You never think something this horrific will happen to you until it does. Things could have ended way differently hadn't the cops shown up so quick. In this case, these cops legit saved my life. My name is Edgar, and this happened last year. I was walking to a nearby carnival that was going on near my house last summer to meet up with my friends. The city has been doing this carnival for us every year, ever since I can remember. And I like to go at least once or twice a year. I'm one of those kids that likes to stay inside and play video games in my free time, so it's nice to get out and do something that's actually fun for a change. The town I live in has nothing fun to do at all. There is almost nothing to do. And all the other cooler and bigger cities are over an hour away. And I don't have my license yet. Nor do I have a whole lot of friends that would be willing to do this kind of stuff with me. Most of my friends are also introverted themselves, and we would much rather play our video games online, rather than actually go and hang out with each other in person most of the time. As antisocial as I am, though, it's in our human nature to socialize. I get quite bored sometimes just sitting at home, so this was supposed to be us friends having a nice evening. When I got there and I found my friends, Nathan and Oscar, we rode some rides, played some of the carnival games, and even got ourselves some snacks. It was quite fun and we were all having a good time. After a little while, we kind of ran out of things to do, so we started pondering the idea of leaving and just going home. Nathan said he wanted to stay a little bit longer before we left, and I was okay with that, along with Oscar as well. So what do you guys want to do? I asked. Well, we could go see what's going on over there in that tent, Nathan said. There was a circus tent that we hadn't explored yet, and that was going to be the last thing we did before we took off, I imagined. So we headed over there, and when we got inside, we saw that there were a group of clowns performing on a stage. They were dancing, juggling, and one of them was riding a unicycle. We decided we wanted to get closer to the stage, so we made our way up to the front. After watching him for a little while, we were getting bored and we were about to leave. But just before we were about to leave, the clown that was riding the unicycle slipped and fell, and his red clown nose fell off and landed right next to me. I hurried to pick it up and I put it in my pocket, not thinking too much about it. I figured he had plenty more of those sponge-like noses, so I didn't think twice about taking it, and I really didn't think that the clown would care. He got back up and continued performing like nothing happened, after he made a quick joke about falling. I didn't think the clown noticed I picked up his nose until he turned his head and made prolonged eye contact with me. I thought that was weird and it kind of made me uncomfortable, but I figured he was just messing around. I told Nathan and Oscar that I was ready to leave and they agreed. Nathan's mom was already waiting for him in the parking lot, and Oscar had to walk a completely different way to get home than I did, so we said our goodbyes and off we went. I took the clown nose out of my pocket and I was playing with it and just looking at it, because I had never seen one in real life before. I thought it was kind of cool that I had it, because it was kind of like a souvenir for me to keep. Suddenly, I heard a slight chuckle. I had already been quite a ways from the carnival and all of the people. Or so I thought anyways. It really spooked me and jump scared me at first. It wasn't like a normal laugh, it had more of a sinister tone to it. It was extremely creepy. When I turned around, all I could see was a dark, shadowy figure that looked like a person. I shined my flashlight over towards him, and almost right away, I noticed that it was one of the clowns from the carnival. "I believe he has something to thought," the clown said. The way he sounded when he said that was just absolutely petrifying. He barely sounded like a human, almost like an entity or a damn demon of some sort. Now, I'm not saying he was a ghost. All I'm saying was I knew right then and there that something horrible was about to happen. I slowly backed away and told the clown that I didn't have anything of his and to please leave me alone. "Well, if you aren't going to give me my nose bath, I'm going to need yours then." After that, he took out what looked like to be a Phillips screwdriver and pointed it at me. It was at that exact moment that I started running, as fast as I could, and I didn't look back once, literally. I ran through the woods rather than taking the road home because I knew a shortcut through the trails that led into my neighborhood. That might have been a risky move on my part, but I was thinking in the moment, and I made a split-second decision. I'm not even sure how long he chased me for because that's how fast I ran. He was a bigger guy, so I doubt he could have run as fast as me anyways. I told my mom exactly what happens when I got home, and she told me we should call the police. We called them, and they showed up to our house, and we talked about what happened to me. They said they couldn't do much as they had no idea what the man looks like. That really upset me because I feel like there was something we could have done. That clown most likely worked for some company that we could call and get a hold of, so we could find his real identity. But we were never able to find out who it was. I definitely won't be going back to that carnival ever again. This story also takes place back in 2016 in the clown era. I was sitting at home one night, lying in bed, looking at my phone before bed. It was late, and it was way later than I would usually stay up, but I remember that night I couldn't sleep for whatever reason. But luckily it was the weekend, so I didn't have to be awake at 5:30 in the morning the next day. I was lying there about to drift off to sleep when all of a sudden I got this strange feeling that I felt like I was being watched. Evidently, I'm not insane and my intuition was correct, because when I put my phone down and looked around my room, as my eyes glanced over my bedroom window that was right next to my bed, I saw the face of a clown peering at me with his face up against the glass. Now, of course, this scared the living shit out of me and I immediately screamed. I ran out of my room and I went to find my dad. He was actually awake to my surprise. Probably because he heard me scream from across the other side of the house. I told him how there was a man dressed up as a clown in our backyard, and that was why I screamed. I've always been terrified of clowns, but man, this mask that he was wearing was quite creepy and disturbing. It almost didn't even look like a mask, it was all too realistic. My dad, of course, ran outside looking for the clown, and he looked around outside for over 5 minutes, but there was no one to be found. Not a single clown or person in sight. My dad told me that I was just having a bad dream and to go back to sleep. But I told him I wasn't dreaming and that I was sure that there was really a clown there and that I'm not just losing my mind. There was no way it was a dream because I wasn't even sleeping. Besides, there was literally a whole entire outbreak about these clowns going on all throughout the country. Kind of angered me that my dad wasn't taking the situation very seriously. I went back to my room and I grabbed a knife along the way, and I kept it beside me while I lied awake in bed once more, trying to get my anxiety straight. I even put a blanket over my window, that way the clown wouldn't be able to see inside, should he have come back. I lied there for just under an hour, I would say, and I started to feel better about the situation. Maybe I was just dreaming, I thought. Even though I could have sworn that I hadn't fallen asleep yet. Sometimes weird things happen in our sleep stages, and I'm aware of that. So I let myself believe that it was nothing, and that I was just letting it get to my head. Then, as I was finally managing to drift off to sleep for once, I heard this very light and faint tapping sound coming from my window. I immediately awoke in fight or flight mode, and I gained the courage to peek outside. I moved the blanket over to the side, and I poked my right eye out of the window. and I saw a man standing there dressed as a clown. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but it looked like he was trying to open the window. He was most definitely trying to kidnap me or something, no question about it. At this point, I knew I wasn't dreaming for 100% certainty. I didn't scream this time either, and I wasn't sure if he had saw me or not. I was hoping that he didn't notice that I saw him this time. That way he wouldn't be spooked and run off again. I rushed all the way to my dad as fast as I possibly could. He was sleeping this time, but I awoke him within seconds of arriving in his room. He followed me to my bedroom and looked out the window where the clown was, and there he was. Clown was still there trying to break in. Holy hell, my dad said. My dad told me to stay put and to call the police. Then he rushed outside, and when he found the clown, he was no longer by the window. He was standing directly in the middle of our backyard with a bat in his hand. My dad charged at him anyways, and the clown braced himself, ready for my dad's attack. As my dad got close enough, the masked man took a swing right for my dad. And somehow, my dad managed to tank the hit to his side and disarm him. My dad started beating the literal hell out of this guy and was half near killing the man by choking him. My dad let the weird guy go, and only a few minutes later the cops arrived. We explained everything we could, the best we could to the police, and they even was searching for him. But as far as I know, the police never turned up with him. We never had another incident like this ever since. I think that clown got the message from my dad loud and clear. I wish that weirdo would have gotten arrested though. But the most important thing is that nothing happened and that my father was able to protect me. I was only 14 years old when this happened, so that's why I couldn't really stick up for myself so much. My dad really is a true hero.